A noblewoman is thrown into a cold, dark prison after a shocking betrayal by the man she trusted most. Alone and facing a grim fate, she has no idea that a powerful figure is about to change everything. What unfolds next is a story of courage, loyalty, and an unexpected bond that will leave you breathless. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this reading. The biting cold pierced through the stone walls of Winthorpe's dungeons. Lady Evelyn, a woman of 40 years, whose beauty had only matured with age, lay shivering on the damp floor. She wore nothing but a tattered cloak, her long auburn hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. The flickering torchlight cast shadows across her high cheekbones and penetrating green eyes, which remained defiant despite her circumstances. Accused of high treason against the crown, Evelyn could scarcely comprehend how quickly her life had crumbled. Just days ago she had been the respected Duchess of Blackmere, admired for her intellect and grace. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner awaiting execution, betrayed by the very man who had vowed to protect her. Her husband, Duke Osric of Blackmere, a man she had once respected if not loved, had handed her over as the guilty party in exchange for his own freedom. The memory of his cold eyes as the royal guards dragged her away still burned in her mind. "Take her," he had said without emotion. "She is the one who conspired with our enemies. I was blind to her treachery." From the shadows of the corridor, the jailer's eyes turned with pity toward Evelyn's fragile figure. Unlike the other prisoners who wailed and begged, she maintained a dignified silence. Her slender fingers traced patterns in the dust, her mind racing to understand the magnitude of the injustice that had befallen her. "Water, my lady," the jailer whispered, extending a small cup through the iron bars. Evelyn looked up, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. She took the cup with hands that bore the marks of chains now removed. "Has there been word of my trial?" The jailer shook his head. "The king himself will decide your fate, my lady. They say he returns from the northern borders tomorrow. King Aldric of Winthorpe." Even the mention of his name sent shivers down Evelyn's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Known as the Iron Wolf, he was feared by his enemies and revered by his allies. Stories of his ruthlessness in battle were legendary. Would such a man listen to her pleas of innocence? In the great throne room of Winthorpe Castle, King Aldric, a formidable man of 42 with broad shoulders and piercing blue eyes, listened with suspicion to the accusations against the Duchess. His raven-black hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back from a face marked by both wisdom and hardship. He wore a dark tunic adorned with silver embroidery beneath a heavy fur-lined cloak fastened with a wolf's head brooch. A stark contrast to the opulent golden silks favored by other rulers. "Your Majesty," said Lord Cedric, Osric's closest ally, "the evidence is clear. The Duchess was corresponding with Eldamar's agents. Duke Osric discovered the letters himself and, despite his love for her, chose loyalty to the crown." Aldric's eyes narrowed. Something in the man's tone rang false. "And where is Duke Osric now?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. "He remains at Blackmere Castle, Your Majesty, securing the border as you commanded." The king nodded slowly. "I shall speak with the prisoner myself. I want to see the woman who would betray her kingdom." As night fell, Aldric crossed the castle grounds to inspect the dungeons personally. Guards bowed low as he passed, his commanding presence filling the narrow stone corridors. The jailer hurried ahead, unlocking doors and lighting additional torches. "The traitor, Your Majesty," the jailer said, gesturing toward Evelyn's cell. Aldric's eyes fell upon the woman huddled in the corner. What he saw disturbed him deeply. Instead of the cowering traitor he expected, he found a woman with quiet dignity etched into every line of her face. Her eyes met his unflinchingly, neither pleading nor defiant, but clear and intelligent. "Leave us," Aldric commanded, and the guards retreated to the far end of the corridor. He approached the cell, studying Evelyn carefully. "You are accused of betraying your kingdom, my lady. What say you to these charges?" Evelyn rose slowly to her feet, standing as tall as her frame would allow. "I am innocent, Your Majesty," I have never corresponded with Eldamar or any of your enemies. I have always served Winthorpe faithfully. Your husband claims otherwise. A flash of pain crossed her features before she composed herself. My husband lies to save himself. It is he who sought alliances with your enemies, not I. Aldrich, a man accustomed to harsh judgment, felt a spark of doubt ignite in his chest. Something about her steady gaze and calm demeanor gave him pause. A lifetime of war had taught him to recognize truth, and there was truth in this woman's words. You would accuse a duke of treason? Such claims require proof. In my chambers at Blackmere, behind the portrait of the old king, there is a hidden compartment. Inside, you will find ledgers detailing Osric's dealings with arms merchants who supply Eldamar. You will also find letters, the real ones, that will prove my innocence. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. A man less observant might have missed the slight tremble of her hands, the only indication of her fear. If you speak falsely, your death will be slow, he warned. I have nothing more to lose, Your Majesty. Death would be a mercy compared to this betrayal. As Evelyn endured another night of torment, Aldrich began a discreet investigation. He dispatched his most trusted knight, Sir Roland, to Blackmere Castle, with orders to search the Duchess's chambers exactly as she had described. 2 days later, Sir Roland returned, his expression grim as he presented a leather pouch to the king. It was exactly where she said, Your Majesty. The ledgers, the letters, all of it. Duke Osric has been selling weapons to Eldamar for years. The accusation against Lady Evelyn appears to be nothing more than a political maneuver to save himself. Aldrich's jaw tightened as he examined the evidence. The king, moved both by justice and a feeling he barely understood, decided to act. In the dead of night, he ordered that Evelyn be removed from her cell and taken to suitable quarters. Guards came for her without explanation, leading her through twisting corridors and up winding stairs. Confused and exhausted, Evelyn offered no resistance. When they reached a well-appointed chamber with a blazing fire, she turned to her escorts in bewilderment. By order of the king, one guard said simply before closing the door. Evelyn stood alone in the warm room, her mind racing. On a chair nearby lay clean garments of fine wool, and a bath steamed behind a screen. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to weep, not from sorrow, but from the unexpected kindness. As dawn broke over the castle walls, Evelyn stood by the window of her new quarters, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. She had bathed and dressed in the simple but elegant gown provided, her hair combed and braided once more. A knock at the door startled her. When it opened, King Aldrich himself stood in the doorway, his imposing figure silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight. Lady Evelyn, he said, his voice softer than before, I believe we have much to discuss. For the first time since her ordeal began, Evelyn saw hope shining in the eyes of a powerful man. A tentative smile curved her lips as she curtsied deeply. Indeed we do, Your Majesty. In the warmed chambers of the East Tower, Evelyn awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the soft linen beneath her and the absence of damp stone walls. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a room far more luxurious than she had expected. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes adorned the walls, and heavy oak furniture sat upon thick woven rugs. Her wounds had been tended to overnight. The raw marks on her wrists now bore healing salve and clean bandages. A soft knock preceded the entrance of a young maid carrying a tray of bread, cheese, and mulled wine. Behind her followed an older woman with a bundle of fabric in her arms. Good morning, my lady, the older woman said with a respectful bow. I am Matilda, assigned to attend to your needs. His Majesty requested these be brought to you. She laid out several garments of rich velvet and fur, clothing befitting a noblewoman, not a prisoner. Evelyn ran her fingers along the emerald-green fabric, suspicious of such unexpected kindness. Who ordered me brought here, and why? The king himself, my lady, Matilda replied, her eyes downcast. Beyond that I cannot say. Evelyn selected a gown of deep blue trimmed with silver fox fur and allowed Matilda to help her dress. The garment fit remarkably well, considering it hadn't been made for her. As Matilda began to arrange her hair, Evelyn's mind raced with questions. What game was Aldrich playing? Was this merely a prelude to a public execution? The door opened. Without warning, and King Aldrich strode in, imposing even without his crown. He wore a fitted leather jerkin over a black tunic, a silver wolf's head pendant hanging at his throat. 2 guards flanked the doorway but remained outside at his gesture. "Leave us," he commanded, and Matilda scurried from the room with a deep curtsy. Evelyn rose to her feet, chin raised. "Your Majesty," she acknowledged, neither cowering nor overly familiar. "I demand to know why I've been brought here." A hint of amusement flickered across Aldrich's stern features. "You are in no position to demand anything, Lady Evelyn. However, I will tell you that your guilt is still being evaluated, but you will not be treated as a criminal unjustly." "Unjustly?" Evelyn repeated, a flash of anger in her eyes. "I spent days in your dungeons based on nothing but my husband's lies." Aldrich clasped his hands behind his back, studying her with intensity. "I have seen the evidence you directed us to. It raises questions." "Not questions, Your Majesty. Answers. Osric is the traitor, not I." The king moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered courtyard below. "Tell me, how did a woman of your intelligence fail to notice her husband's treachery until it was too late?" Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "You assume much about my marriage, Your Majesty. Osric and I have lived separate lives for years. Our union was arranged for political advantage when I was 38. Young enough to still bear heirs, old enough to have gained wisdom and connections. He wanted my family's wealth and naval power. I wanted security for my people." She approached, standing beside him at the window. "We maintained appearances, nothing more." Aldrich turned to face her, noting the strength in her posture despite all she had endured. "And yet you lived in his castle, bore his title." "A gilded cage is still a cage," she replied simply. "I managed Blackmere's accounts, oversaw the household, fulfilled my duties. I was not privy to his private correspondence or business dealings. He made certain of that." The king's expression remained unreadable. "I have dispatched riders to investigate further. Until their return, you will remain here, comfortable, but guarded." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I do not expect pity from those with power, Your Majesty, only justice." Something in her words seemed to strike Aldrich. His eyes, blue as a winter sky, softened almost imperceptibly. "Justice is what I seek as well, my lady. And if justice reveals my innocence, what then?" "Then you will have my personal apology and protection." He moved toward the door but paused. "Is there anything else you require in the meantime?" Evelyn hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Books, perhaps, and parchment. If I am to be confined, I would prefer not to waste away in idleness." Aldrich nodded. "It shall be done." As he reached for the door handle, he added, "You are unlike any woman I have encountered, Lady Evelyn. Imprisonment tends to strip away pretense, Your Majesty." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he departed, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts once more. In the royal council chamber, tensions ran high as rumors of Evelyn's rescue from the dungeons spread among the nobles. Lord Cedric, his face flushed with barely contained anger, addressed the king directly. "Your Majesty, many find it concerning that the accused traitor now enjoys your hospitality rather than awaiting justice in a cell where she belongs." Aldrich, seated at the head of the massive oak table, fixed Cedric with a piercing stare. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Cedric?" The nobleman swallowed hard. "No, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that Duke Osric should be consulted before—" "Duke Osric does not rule here," Aldrich interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. "I do. And I will determine Lady Evelyn's guilt or innocence based on evidence, not accusations." Sir Roland, the knight who had retrieved the evidence from Blackmere, cleared his throat. "The ledgers are authentic, Your Majesty. They detail weapons shipments to Eldamar dating back 3 years. All bearing Duke Osric's seal." Murmurs rippled through the assembled lords. Aldrich raised a hand for silence. "Continue the investigation. I want every connection traced, every coin accounted for, and increase the guards along the northern border." If Osric has indeed been arming our enemies, we must be prepared for the consequences. As the council dispersed, Aldrich remained seated, lost in thought. The evidence against Osric was damning, but something larger was at play, a conspiracy that threatened the very stability of the kingdom. At Blackmere Castle, Duke Osric received word of Evelyn's changed circumstances with cold fury. Tall and lean with a precisely trimmed beard, he paced his chambers like a caged animal, his expensive robes of burgundy and gold swirling around him. She was supposed to rot in that dungeon. He snarled to his steward. How could Aldrich have discovered the truth so quickly? The king sent his personal knight, my lord. They searched the duchess's chambers. Osric slammed his fist against the wall. She told them where to look. That scheming witch. He turned, his face contorted with rage. Prepare my fastest riders. I want eyes on Winthorpe Castle immediately, and send word to our friends. I will reclaim what's mine and destroy anyone who stands in my way. Back at Winthorpe, Evelyn spent her afternoon in the castle library, a luxury she hadn't expected to be granted. Surrounded by leather-bound volumes and scrolls, she felt a sense of calm return. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the stone floor, King Aldrich found her there, deeply engrossed in a historical text. She rose when she noticed him, marking her place with a ribbon. Your Majesty. Please sit, he said, gesturing to her chair before taking a seat opposite her. I've received a preliminary report that further supports your claims of innocence, but I would hear more from you directly. Evelyn studied him carefully. In the warm glow of the library's candlelight, his features seemed less harsh, his eyes more thoughtful than cold. What would you know? Tell me about Blackmere, about Osric's connections, anyone who visited frequently or received special treatment. For the next hour, Evelyn detailed everything she could remember. Merchants from across the sea, midnight meetings, documents hastily hidden when she entered rooms. Aldrich listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed his strategic mind. You have an impressive memory for details, he remarked when she finished. When one lives among wolves, one learns to watch carefully. She replied. Something like respect flickered in Aldrich's eyes. Indeed. He leaned forward, his voice lower. Lady Evelyn, I believe you have been caught in a web not entirely of your husband's making. The weapons, the correspondence with Eldamar, they point to a larger conspiracy. Against you? Against Winthorpe? Against peace itself? Aldrich's expression darkened. War profits some greatly. Peace profits all, but with smaller shares. Evelyn considered his words. And you believe Osric is merely a piece in this larger game? A significant piece, but yes. He rose, moving to stand beside the fireplace, which makes you either extremely valuable or extremely dangerous to those pulling the strings. Or both, Evelyn said quietly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Evelyn realized the king was not the tyrant she had feared, and Aldrich saw in her not just a victim, but a woman of great intelligence and courage. It grows late, Aldrich said finally. Return to your chambers. I've doubled the guards for your protection. As Evelyn made her way back through the torchlit corridors, she found herself thinking of the king's penetrating gaze, of the unexpected gentleness in his voice when he spoke of justice. Something new and dangerous had begun to grow between them, something neither had anticipated nor sought, and in the shadows of the castle, whispers of conspiracy continued to spread, weaving a web that would soon ensnare them all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Winthorpe Castle as Evelyn ventured beyond her chambers for the first time without an escort. King Aldrich had granted her limited freedom to move within the castle walls, though, always under the watchful eyes of guards positioned discreetly at a distance. She walked with measured steps, her emerald gown, another gift from the royal stores, sweeping the floor as she made her way toward the eastern courtyard. After a week of investigations, Aldrich had grown increasingly convinced of her innocence. Their conversations had become more frequent, revealing unexpected commonalities between the warrior king and the wronged duchess. Today, Evelyn sought fresh air and solitude to gather her thoughts. she found a secluded bench beneath a bare oak tree, its branches etched starkly against the winter sky. Despite the cold, she welcomed the bite of fresh air after so many days confined indoors. From this vantage point, she could see the training grounds where Aldrich himself now stood, sword in hand, sparring with Sir Roland. The king moved with surprising grace for a man of his size, each strike precise and controlled. Watching him, Evelyn could understand why enemies feared him on the battlefield. There was an intensity to his movements, a focused power that commanded respect. He is impressive, is he not? Evelyn turned to find Lady Matilda, the king's elderly aunt and one of the few who had shown her kindness from the beginning. The older woman settled beside her on the bench, her eyes crinkling with knowing amusement. "He is skilled," Evelyn acknowledged carefully. "And you have caught his attention in a way no one has in years," Matilda said bluntly. "Aldrich has always been a solitary man, but he speaks of you often." Heat rose to Evelyn's cheeks despite the cold. "His Majesty merely seeks the truth about my husband's treachery." "Perhaps at first," Matilda agreed, "but there is more to it now, I think." She patted Evelyn's hand. "Be careful, my dear. The court watches closely, and not all wish." "You well?" Before Evelyn could respond, a horn sounded from the castle gates, announcing a returning patrol. Lady Matilda rose. "That would be Lord Gareth with news from the northern borders. You should come. This concerns you as well." In the great hall, Aldrich had already taken his seat at the high table, freshly changed from his training clothes into a tunic of deep blue adorned with silver embroidery. He acknowledged Evelyn with a slight nod as she entered with Lady Matilda, gesturing for her to take a seat nearby, a courtesy that did not go unnoticed by the assembled nobles. Lord Gareth, a battle-hardened veteran with a shock of white hair, bowed deeply before delivering his report. "Your Majesty, I bring grave news. Duke Osric has been gathering forces at Blackmere. Our scouts report mercenaries arriving daily, and the smithies work through the night forging weapons." A tense silence fell over the hall. Aldrich's expression remained impassive, but Evelyn noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the arms of his chair. "And what of Eldamar?" the king asked. "Their troops mass at the border, Your Majesty. It appears the Duke has made good on his promises to them. They await only his signal to march." Murmurs of alarm rippled through the gathered lords and ladies. Aldrich raised a hand for silence. "Osric prepares for war, then," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "A war he has helped finance by selling arms to our enemies. He cannot hope to stand against Winthorpe's full might," Lord Cedric interjected, though Evelyn noted a tremor in his voice. "Perhaps he merely seeks to strengthen his position for negotiations. Or perhaps," Evelyn spoke for the first time, her clear voice cutting through the tension, "he believes he has enough allies within these very walls to ensure his victory." All eyes turned to her. Some faces registered shock at her boldness, others barely concealed hostility. But Aldrich's expression showed something else entirely: appreciation. "Lady Evelyn raises a valid point," the king said. "Traitors rarely act alone. Lord Gareth, double the palace guard and investigate any unusual communications leaving the castle." He rose from his seat, commanding attention with his presence alone. "We prepare for war, but we shall not wait for Osric to strike. First, I want our armies ready to march within a fortnight." As the council dispersed to carry out his orders, Aldrich gestured for Evelyn to remain. When they were alone, save for his personal guards, he spoke in a lower tone. "You took a risk speaking out like that." "I merely stated what you already suspected," she replied. "I lived with Osric for 5 years. I know he cultivates allies like a gardener tends prized roses, with careful attention and generous rewards." Aldrich studied her for a moment. "Walk with me." They moved through the castle corridors side by side, their footsteps echoing on the stone floors. Guards and servants bowed as they passed, eyes widening at the sight of their king in such close conversation with the woman many still considered a traitor. "You were a valuable piece in Osric's plans," Aldrich said as they entered the relative privacy of the glass gardens, where even in winter, herbs and medicinal plants flourished in the heated air. "Your family's naval connections, your own intelligence. He needed you." As a shield, nothing more, Evelyn said bitterly. Someone to blame when his schemes inevitably unraveled. And yet you survived. You outwitted him. Aldrich stopped beside a flowering rosemary plant, its blue blossoms incongruous in the winter landscape beyond the glass walls. That makes you dangerous to him now. Evelyn touched a delicate bloom, considering her words carefully. What will you do with me when this is over, Your Majesty? If we survive Osric's vengeance? Something shifted in Aldrich's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips usually pressed into a stern line. That depends on what you want, Lady Evelyn. The question caught her off guard. No one, certainly not her husband, had asked about her desires in years. I would return to my family's lands by the sea, start anew, alone. The word hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Before she could answer, Sir Roland burst into the gardens, his face grave. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. An urgent message from the eastern outpost. Eldamar's forces have crossed the border. The war has begun. The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Aldrich's expression hardened as he transformed instantly, from the almost gentle man of seconds ago to the warrior king. Summon the War Council immediately. In the following days, Winthorpe Castle became a hive of military activity. Messengers rode in and out at all hours, troops mustered in the courtyard, and blacksmiths worked tirelessly to forge weapons and armor. Aldrich spent most of his time in the war room with his generals, planning their response to the dual threats of Osric's rebellion and Eldamar's invasion. To everyone's surprise, he included Evelyn in these councils. Initially met with skepticism by the generals, she quickly proved her value with detailed knowledge of Blackmere Castle's defenses and Osric's tactical tendencies. He will expect you to divide your forces, she explained, leaning over the map. Table one evening as candlelight flickered across the parchment. Osric knows you cannot ignore Eldamar's advance, but he will see that as an opportunity to strike at Winthorpe itself, while your main army is engaged elsewhere. Aldrich nodded, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they both studied the map. Then we must surprise him. Lord Gareth, take 5,000 men to engage Eldamar at Ravenwood Pass. Sir Roland, you will lead a smaller force as if heading to reinforce the northern garrisons, but circle back to ambush Osric when he moves against us. And you, Your Majesty? Sir Roland asked. I will remain here with the Royal Guard, Aldrich replied, his eyes meeting Evelyn's briefly, to protect the castle and deal with any internal threats that may reveal themselves. As the meeting concluded and the generals filed out to prepare their troops, Evelyn remained behind. In the now empty war room, the tension between her and Aldrich had grown palpable. You're risking much by trusting me, she said quietly. There are still those who believe I am Osric's accomplice. Aldrich approached her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. I trust what I see, Lady Evelyn. And what I see in you is not treachery, but strength. His words warmed her more than they should. In the dim light, with no one to witness, Evelyn allowed herself to acknowledge the growing attraction between them. A dangerous sentiment in these precarious times. The coming days will test us all, she murmured. Indeed they will. His hand moved as if to touch hers, then withdrew. Rest now. Tomorrow brings the real battle. As Evelyn made her way back to her chambers, whispers followed her through the corridors. The castle buzzed not only with war preparations but also with gossip about the king's apparent favor toward her. Some speculated about political advantages, others about more personal motivations. Evelyn ignored them all, knowing that far more dangerous plots were unfolding. In Nordeuncenter, her room, a surprise awaited. A small wooden box on her bed, containing a delicately crafted silver dagger with a wolf's head pommel. A note in Aldrich's bold handwriting simply read, "For protection, trust few." She slipped the dagger into her sleeve, comforted by its weight. Outside her window, the moon illuminated the snow-covered landscape, peaceful despite the chaos to come. In the distance, beyond the castle walls, she could see torches moving, soldiers preparing for war. A soft knock at her door startled her. She drew the dagger instinctively before calling out, "Who is there?" "A message from the king, my lady," came the reply. Cautiously, Evelyn opened the door to find a young page, wide-eyed and nervous. "His Majesty requests your presence in the private council chamber at dawn," the boy said. "He says to tell you that Lord Cedric has been arrested trying to flee the castle with sensitive documents. The conspiracy begins to unravel." As the page departed, Evelyn closed her door and leaned against it, heart racing. Events were accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. Between the corridors of Winthorpe Castle, a different kind of battle was being fought, one of loyalty and betrayal, of secrets and lies. And in the middle of it all stood Evelyn and Aldrich, drawn together by circumstances neither could have foreseen, their fates now inextricably intertwined by forces beyond their control. Dawn had barely broken over the castle walls when Evelyn made her way to the private council chamber. The corridors were unusually quiet, with most of the castle still asleep after the frantic preparations of the previous day. 2 guards flanked the heavy oak door, their expressions revealing nothing as they admitted her with silent nods. Inside, Aldrich stood alone by the hearth, his powerful frame silhouetted against the dancing flames. He had clearly not slept. Shadows darkened the skin beneath his eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. He wore a simple black tunic without adornment, his crown conspicuously absent. "Lady Evelyn," he acknowledged, turning to face her. "Thank you for coming so early." "Your message suggested urgency," she replied, approaching him. "You've arrested Lord Cedric?" Aldrich gestured to a small table where several documents lay scattered. He was caught attempting to send these to Osric. Battle plans, guard rotations, details of our defenses. His voice was controlled, but Evelyn could detect the underlying fury. When confronted, he broke quickly, named several others involved in the conspiracy. Evelyn examined the documents, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. "This confirms what we suspected. Osric's influence reaches deep into your court." "Deeper than I imagined," Aldrich admitted, a rare vulnerability in his tone. "Men I've trusted for years, who fought beside me in battle." "Gold and promises can corrupt even the most loyal hearts," Evelyn said softly. "What did Osric offer them?" "Land, titles, power in the new regime he plans to establish." Aldrich's laugh was bitter as he poured 2 goblets of wine, offering one to Evelyn. "He promises to be a more generous king than I." "You?" Evelyn's eyes widened. "Then his ambition is greater than I thought. He doesn't just seek independence for Blackmere, he wants your throne." "With Eldamar's backing." Aldrich drank deeply from his goblet. "A puppet king for them to control. Winthorpe would effectively become a vassal state, its resources stripped to fuel Eldamar's expansion." Evelyn shook her head, pieces falling into place. The weapons he sold them were just the beginning, a down payment on their support. She paused, studying Aldrich's face. "Have you slept at all?" "Sleep is a luxury in wartime," he replied, though the ghost of a smile touched his lips at her concern. "Even kings need rest," she countered. "You cannot lead with a clouded mind." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. In the flickering firelight, Aldrich seemed less the formidable king and more the man. Weary, concerned, human. Evelyn found herself drawn to this version of him, unguarded and vulnerable. "Lord Gareth reports that Osric has fled Blackmere," Aldrich said, breaking the moment. "He's gathering his forces at Ravencrest, preparing to march." "Ravencrest?" Evelyn frowned. "That makes little strategic sense unless—" Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Unless he plans to join with Eldamar's army before attacking." Aldrich nodded, impressed by her quick grasp of military tactics. "Precisely. Our scouts confirm Eldamar's forces are heading toward Ravencrest, rather than directly attacking our border fortresses." "Then you must move quickly to prevent their joining," Evelyn urged. "Once combined, their numbers would overwhelm even Winthorpe's army." "My thoughts exactly." Aldrich moved to a large map spread across another table, gesturing for her to join him. I've ordered Lord Gareth to intercept Eldamar here, at Foxwood Pass. Sir Roland will lead a separate force to engage Osric before he can reach the rendezvous point. Evelyn studied the map, noting the positions marked with small wooden figures. And what of you? You should be safe within these walls while the traitors are still being rooted out. I will lead the main force myself, Aldrich stated firmly. My men need to see their king fighting alongside them. That's madness, Evelyn protested, surprising herself with her vehemence. You're too valuable to risk on the battlefield. If you fall, if I cower in my castle while sending others to die for me, I do not deserve to rule. He interrupted, his voice resolute. Evelyn fell silent, recognizing the immovable determination in his stance. This was the warrior king the legends spoke of, unbending, fearless, perhaps even reckless in his courage. When do you march? She asked finally. Tomorrow at first light. His eyes searched hers. You will remain here under heavy guard. The castle will be sealed until my return. And if you don't return? The question escaped before she could stop it. Aldrich moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Then pray that Sir Roland or Lord Gareth succeeds where I have failed. The kingdom must survive, even if its king does not. There are those who would say the kingdom is its king, Evelyn murmured. Then they understand neither kingdoms nor kings. His hand rose, hesitating for a heartbeat before gently touching her cheek. We are all replaceable, Lady Evelyn. All except perhaps you. The unexpected tenderness of his touch and words left her breathless. Me? I am nothing but a disgraced duchess, falsely accused and barely redeemed. You are far more than that, Aldrich said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You are the one person in this castle I trust completely, because you have no reason to lie to me, no ambition to claim my throne, no desire except to see justice done. You cannot know that, she challenged, though she made no move to step away from his touch. I know people, Lady Evelyn. It's how I've survived this long. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, feather-light. War makes strangers into allies, and friends into enemies. But sometimes, rarely, it reveals something true. In the silent chamber, with dawn breaking outside and the fire crackling beside them, time seemed suspended. Evelyn felt herself drawn toward him, her body betraying her mind's caution. Aldrich's eyes darkened as he sensed her response, his head bending slightly toward hers. A sharp knock shattered the moment. Aldrich stepped back immediately, his kingly composure returning like a mask sliding into place. Enter, he commanded, his voice betraying nothing of what had just transpired. Sir Roland appeared, already dressed in full battle armor. Your Majesty, the troops are assembled in the courtyard for your inspection, and we've captured another of Osric's spies attempting to leave the castle. I'll be there momentarily, Aldrich replied. When Roland had withdrawn, he turned back to Evelyn. We must continue this discussion later. Of course, Your Majesty, she replied formally, though her heart still raced from their near encounter. Aldrich, he corrected, surprising her. When we are alone, I would hear my name from your lips, not my title. Before she could respond, he strode from the room, leaving her to compose herself in private. The day passed in a flurry of activity as the castle prepared for the king's departure. Evelyn watched from her window as troops assembled in the courtyard. Below, their armor glinting in the winter sun. Aldrich moved among them, speaking with soldiers, inspecting weapons, embodying the leader they would follow into battle. As evening fell, an unexpected summons brought her to the royal chapel at EEC, small, intimate space where the kings of Winthorpe had prayed for centuries before battle. She found Aldrich there alone, kneeling before the altar, his sword laid before him. He rose when he heard her enter, turning to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'm glad you came. You summoned me, she reminded him with a slight smile. And you could have refused. He gestured for her to join him on the stone bench beside the altar. In the candlelight, his features seemed softer, the weight of command temporarily lifted. I wanted to speak with you once more before tomorrow. Evelyn sat beside him, her shoulder nearly touching his. To discuss strategy? No, he admitted. To find a moment of peace before the chaos. He turned to face her fully. You asked earlier what would happen if I don't return. I have made arrangements. If I fall, you will be escorted safely to your family's lands with a full pardon and restoration of your titles and properties. The thought of his death struck her with unexpected force. Don't speak of such things. I must. His hand found hers in the dimness. War makes us confront mortality, Evelyn. I have faced death many times, but never before had I someone I regretted leaving behind. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes, unbidden and unwelcome. You hardly know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you faced betrayal with dignity. I know you seek truth, not power. I know when you speak, I wish to listen. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. In another life, in peacetime. In another life, she echoed, understanding all he left unsaid. The heavy chapel door creaked open, and Lady Matilda entered, pausing when she saw them seated so close together. Forgive me, she said, though her eyes twinkled knowingly. I did not mean to interrupt your prayers. No interruption, Aldrich said, rising. I should review the final preparations with my commanders. As he moved to leave, he paused beside Evelyn. Rest well, he said softly, and keep that dagger close. When he had gone, Lady Matilda settled beside Evelyn with a sigh. I have known my nephew all his life, and never have I seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. We are allies. In unusual circumstances, nothing more. Evelyn insisted, though the warmth in her cheeks betrayed her. Unusual circumstances often reveal truths that comfort conceals, the older woman replied wisely. Be careful with his heart, my dear. It has known little tenderness. The night fell heavy with snow as Evelyn returned to her chambers. Sleep eluded her as she thought of the coming day, of Aldrich marching to war, of the uncertain future that awaited them all. Outside her window, the castle was alive with preparation. Soldiers checking armor, sharpening swords, saying goodbyes to loved ones. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Cautiously, she approached the door. Who is there? It is Aldrich, came the reply, his voice low. She opened the door to find him standing alone, without guards or attendants. He had shed his formal attire for a simple tunic and trousers, his hair loose around his shoulders rather than pulled back in its usual severe style. May I enter? He asked, an unusual hesitance in his tone. Evelyn stepped aside, her heart hammering in her chest. Is something wrong? Has there been news? No, he said, closing the door behind him. I simply found I could not leave tomorrow without... He trailed off, searching for words that seemed to elude even his commanding presence. Without? She prompted gently. Without telling you that you have changed something in me, he finished, his voice rough with emotion. In the midst of betrayal and war, you have reminded me that there are things worth fighting for, beyond crown and country. In the gentle glow of the hearth fire, with snowflakes dancing beyond the window, Evelyn and Aldrich stood facing each other, two souls drawn together by circumstance, held together by something deeper neither dared yet name. Come back safely, she whispered. That is all I ask. I will try, he promised, reaching out to take her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both chivalrous and intimate. Until then, know that you have given this battle-weary king something he had thought long lost. Hope. As he turned to leave, Evelyn felt the weight of unspoken words between them, of possibilities that hung in the balance of the coming war. Whatever tomorrow brought, nothing between them would ever be the same. Again, the war exploded across Winthorpe's eastern borders with brutal force. 2 weeks had passed since Aldrich's departure, and each day brought new reports of battles won and lost, of villages burned and lives shattered. In the great hall of Winthorpe Castle, Evelyn stood beside Lady Matilda as a mud-splattered messenger delivered the latest news. The king's forces engaged Duke Osric at Ravenwood Ridge, my ladies, the young man reported, exhaustion evident in his voice. His Majesty led the charge himself, breaking through the Duke's front lines, They've pushed Osric's army back toward Blackmere, but Eldamar's forces are attempting to outflank them from the north. Evelyn studied the large map spread across the council table, moving wooden markers to reflect the new positions. The strategy was becoming clear. Aldrich was attempting to drive a wedge between Osric and his Eldamar allies before they could combine their strength. "And casualties?" Lady Matilda asked, her lined face betraying concern for her nephew. "Heavy on both sides, my lady," the messenger admitted, "but the king remains unharmed and in command." Relief flooded through Evelyn, though she kept her expression neutral before the gathered nobles who still watched her with suspicion. In the 2 weeks since Aldrich's departure, she had stepped into an unexpected role within the castle. With many of the king's trusted advisors accompanying him to war, she had become an unofficial administrator, organizing supplies, managing the remaining household, and caring for the wounded who returned from battle. The villagers from the eastern provinces continue to seek shelter here, she informed the council after the messenger had been dismissed. "We must prepare more accommodations and ensure adequate food stores." Lord Talbot, one of the few senior nobles left behind, frowned. "The castle's resources are already stretched thin, Lady Evelyn. Perhaps these refugees should be directed elsewhere." "And where would you have them go, my lord?" Evelyn challenged, her voice firm but measured. "Their homes burn while their king fights to protect them. We cannot turn them away." "Lady Evelyn speaks wisely," Lady Matilda interjected before Talbot could respond. "My nephew would expect nothing less than compassion for his people." The mention of Aldrich settled the matter, at least temporarily. As the council dispersed, Evelyn remained at the map table, studying the markers with growing concern. The war was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and winter would only make conditions worse for both soldiers and civilians. "You've done remarkably well," Lady Matilda said quietly, joining her at the table. "Many of these lords who once called for your execution now look to you for guidance." "Not guidance," Evelyn corrected with a tired smile. "Just organization. I managed Blackmere's household for years. This is little different." "It is entirely different, and we both know it." The older woman's shrewd eyes studied her closely. "You care for these people, for this kingdom, for its king." Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I owe His Majesty my life. Of course I care for his kingdom. Is that all?" Lady Matilda pressed gently. Before Evelyn could respond, the door to the great hall burst open, and Lady Rowan, Aldrich's young cousin, rushed in, her face alight with excitement. "A royal messenger approaches," she exclaimed. "With the king's personal standard." Evelyn's heart leapt. A personal message from Aldrich? She had received no direct communication since his departure, though she had sent several reports via trusted couriers, detailing the situation at the castle, and offering what strategic insights she could glean from her knowledge of Osric's tactics. The messenger, a knight bearing the silver wolf insignia of the royal guard, bowed deeply before presenting Evelyn with a small leather pouch sealed with the king's wax emblem. "For Lady Evelyn's eyes only," he announced. "By command of His Majesty." Conscious of the curious gazes around her, Evelyn accepted the pouch with outward calm, though her fingers trembled slightly. "Thank you, Sir Knight. Please refresh yourself before your return journey." Only when she reached the privacy of her chambers did Evelyn break the seal. Inside, she found a folded parchment wrapped around a small silver brooch shaped like a wolf's head, a miniature version of the emblem Aldrich himself wore. The letter, written in Aldrich's bold hand, was brief, but sent her heart racing. "Evelyn, your counsel regarding Osric's tendency to overextend his right flank proved invaluable. We have pushed him back to the Blackwater River, though Eldamar's forces remain a threat to our north. Reports reach me daily of your management of Winthorpe in my absence. You have earned the respect of my household in ways I could not have predicted. The brooch I send is worn only by those in my innermost circle of trust. Wear it, and all will know you speak with my voice." In the cold nights of this campaign, I find my thoughts turning to our conversations in the chapel, to words left unspoken. War strips away pretense, leaving only truth. And the truth, Evelyn, is that you have awakened something in me I thought long dead. I fight now not only for crown and country, but for the chance to return to you. Until then, Aldrich, Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her fingers tracing each word as if to absorb their meaning more deeply. She pinned the wolf brooch to her gown with reverent care, understanding the significance of such a gesture. Aldrich had publicly declared his trust in her, perhaps more. That evening, as she made her rounds checking on the wounded soldiers in the castle's makeshift infirmary, Evelyn noticed the immediate effect of the brooch. Guards straightened as she passed, servants hurried to fulfill her requests, and even Lord Talbot addressed her with newfound respect. "The eastern barracks are nearly full," reported the head physician, a gruff older man who had initially been skeptical of Evelyn's authority. "We need more space for the wounded coming in tomorrow." "Clear the western storage rooms," Evelyn decided. "Move the grain stores to the underground cellars and prepare pallets there." "At once, my lady," the man replied with a respectful nod to her brooch. Later that night, alone in her chambers, Evelyn composed her response to Aldrich. She wrote carefully, aware that her words would reach him in the midst of war. "Aldrich, Winthorpe stands strong in your absence. Your people show remarkable resilience, and I am honored to serve them in any capacity. The brooch you sent has silenced the last whispers of doubt regarding my loyalty, though I wear it not for them, but as a reminder of your trust. The reports from the front lines concern me. Osric will not retreat to Blackmere Castle. It is too easily besieged. I suspect he will make for Ravenscrag Pass, where the terrain would favor his smaller force and allow him to reunite with Eldamar's troops. Watch the northern ridges carefully as, for your words about thoughts in the night, know that you are not alone in such reflections. I too find myself dwelling on conversations interrupted and sentiments half expressed. War may strip away pretense, but it also creates barriers of distance and duty that test even the strongest connections. Return safely. That remains my only true request. Yours, Evelyn." She sealed the letter and summoned a trusted messenger, instructing him to deliver it directly to the king's hands. As the man rode out into the night, Evelyn stood at her window, watching until his torch disappeared into the darkness. Somewhere out there, amidst the chaos of battle, Aldrich fought not only for his kingdom, but also, perhaps, for a future neither of them had dared imagine. Days passed, bringing more wounded soldiers and desperate refugees to the castle gates. Evelyn worked tirelessly, organizing shelter, distributing supplies, and maintaining order. The silver wolf brooch at her shoulder became a symbol of hope and authority to those seeking assistance. "You should rest," Lady Matilda urged one evening, finding Evelyn still awake in the great hall, reviewing reports by candlelight. "You've scarcely slept in days." "I'll rest when there are fewer people suffering," Evelyn replied, though she couldn't stifle a yawn. "You'll be of no use to anyone if you collapse," the older woman said firmly. "Besides, a new report has arrived from the front. Aldrich has engaged Osric's main force at Ravenscrag, just as you predicted." Evelyn's exhaustion vanished instantly. "What news of the battle?" Still ongoing when the messenger departed. But he brought this. Lady Matilda handed her another sealed letter bearing Aldrich's mark. This message was briefer than the first, written hastily in a field tent. "Your warning about Ravenscrag saved countless lives. Osric was indeed waiting there with Eldamar's vanguard. We engaged them at dawn. The battle goes poorly. I may be surrounded by morning. If word comes of my capture or death, do not believe it until you see my body with your own eyes. Osric will use any deception to draw you out. Stay within Winthorpe's walls. Trust Sir Roland if he returns without me. The silver pendant I wear next to my heart gives me courage. Think of me." Aldrich. Evelyn clutched the parchment, her knuckles whitening. The thought of Aldrich captured or killed sent a wave of cold fear through her unlike anything she had experienced before. Even her own imprisonment had not terrified her so completely. "I must go to him," she whispered, more to herself than to Lady Matilda. "That would be precisely what Osric wants." The older woman reminded her gently, "Aldrich would never forgive himself if harm came to you, and I would never forgive myself if I remained safe while he faces death." Evelyn rose, decision made. "I'll take a small escort. Loyal guards who know the terrain. We can move faster. Then a formal delegation. Lady Matilda studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You love him, don't you? The question stopped Evelyn short. She had not allowed herself to name the emotion that had been growing within her since those first conversations with Aldrich in the library, since his gentle touch in the chapel, since his letters that spoke of feelings beyond political alliance. She began, then straightened her shoulders. Yes, I believe I do. Then go, Lady Matilda said simply. But go wisely. Take Sir Gawain and his rangers. They know every forest path and hidden trail. Travel by night, and take this. She removed a ring from her finger, a heavy silver band bearing the royal crest. This was given to me by Aldrich's father. It will identify you to any loyal commander in the field. Preparations were made in secret. By midnight, Evelyn had exchanged her fine gown for practical riding clothes, sturdy trousers, a thick tunic, and a hooded cloak lined with fur. Sir Gawain, a grizzled veteran who had known Aldrich since boyhood, assembled 5 of his most trusted rangers. We'll avoid the main roads, he explained as they gathered in the stables. There's a network of game trails through the eastern forests that should take us within a half-day's ride of Ravenscrag by tomorrow night. Eveline mounted a swift bay mare, adjusting the sword belt at her waist. She had insisted on basic weapons, training during her time at Winthorpe, and while she was no warrior, she could at least defend herself if necessary. As they slipped out through a seldom-used postern gate, Lady Matilda pressed a small vial into Evelyn's hand. Healing tincture, she explained, for the king, should he need it. The small party rode into the night, leaving the safety of Winthorpe behind. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the man Evelyn had never expected to love. The silver wolf brooch gleamed against her dark cloak, a beacon of purpose and promise as they disappeared into the shadowy forest. The acrid smell of smoke and blood hung heavy in the air as Evelyn and her small party crested the final ridge overlooking Ravenscrag. Below them, the aftermath of battle spread across the valley like a gruesome tapestry. Abandoned siege engines, scattered debris, and the grim work of collecting the dead. 3 days of hard riding through forest paths and hidden trails had brought them to the edge of what had clearly been a ferocious engagement. The fighting has moved south, Sir Gawain observed, pointing to distant columns of smoke. But the royal standard still flies there, near that cluster of tents. Evelyn's heart leapt at the sight of the silver wolf banner, tattered but still, visible against the gray winter sky. Aldrich lives then, or his commanders maintain the pretense to keep morale intact, cautioned one of the rangers, earning a sharp look from Gawain. We approach with care, Evelyn decided, pulling her hood lower to shadow her face. The king warned of deception. Until I see him with my own eyes, we trust no one. They descended into the valley as dusk fell, the lengthening shadows providing additional cover. Avoiding the main encampment, they circled toward a smaller group of tents set apart from the others. The command post, Gawain explained, where the king would likely be found if he still lived. A challenge came when they were still 50 paces from the perimeter. Halt! Identify yourselves! Sir Gawain stepped forward. Sir Gawain of the Royal Rangers, with companions from Winthorpe Castle. The sentry's torch illuminated them partially, revealing Gawain's familiar face but leaving Evelyn in shadow. Advance, and be recognized. The rest stay mounted. Gawain approached while Evelyn and the others remained still. She heard low conversation. Then Gawain returned, his expression tight with concern. The king was wounded in yesterday's battle, he reported quietly. He lives, but is confined to his tent under the care of physicians. I've secured passage for you alone, my lady. They believe you to be Lady Matilda's handmaiden carrying medicines. Evelyn dismounted, her legs stiff from days of riding. Wait here. If I'm not back by dawn, we'll come for you, Gawain assured her, his hand resting briefly on his sword hilt. Heart-pounding, Evelyn followed a young squire through the maze of tents. The camp was eerily subdued, no victory songs or boasting. Tales around campfires, only the muffled groans of wounded men and hushed conversations. Whatever advantage Aldrich had gained in the battle had clearly come at terrible cost. The royal tent stood larger than the others, its fabric adorned with the silver wolf emblem. 2 knights of the royal guard flanked its entrance, their armor, dented and bloodstained, but their posture unyielding. "Medicines from Winthorpe," the squire announced, then departed without waiting for acknowledgement. The guards exchanged glances before the elder of the two pulled back the tent flap. "Be brief," he instructed. "His Majesty needs rest." The interior was dimly lit by oil lamps, the air heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs and blood. Evelyn moved past a table littered with maps and dispatches toward a curtained section at the rear. Behind her, the tent flap fell closed, sealing her inside. "Who comes?" The voice that emerged from behind the curtain was Aldrich's, but weaker than she remembered, strained with pain. Evelyn pushed aside the curtain and felt her breath catch. Aldrich lay on a field cot, his torso heavily bandaged, a dark stain spreading across the white linen. His face was pale beneath a layer of grime and several days' growth of beard, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, widened in shock at the sight of her. "Evelyn," he whispered, as if fearing she might be a fever dream. "What madness brings you here?" She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees beside the cot. "Your letter. You spoke of possible capture or death. I couldn't—" Her voice faltered as she took in the extent of his injuries. "What happened?" Aldrich attempted to sit up, wincing with the effort. "Osric's archers, an ambush as we pursued their retreating forces." His hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength. "You shouldn't have come. It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe while Osric lives," she countered, reaching for the vial lady Matilda had given her. "I brought medicine, and news from Winthorpe." As she helped him drink the tincture, Aldrich's eyes never left her face. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "You wear the brooch." Evelyn's fingers rose instinctively to touch the silver wolf at her shoulder. "It has served me well. Your people respect it. Respect your choice to trust me." "Not my people," he corrected. "Our people now." The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate crisis. Evelyn busied herself checking his bandages, using the task to gather her thoughts. "The wound is deep but clean," she observed, "with proper care." "Evelyn." Aldrich interrupted her, his hand capturing hers once more. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding them clear and intent despite his weakened state. "I believed I might die yesterday," he said softly. "As the arrows fell and men died around me, I had only one regret, that I had not spoken plainly to you when I had the chance." Aldrich, "No, let me finish while I have the strength." He shifted, grimacing with pain but determined. "I have lived my life in service to crown and kingdom. I have known duty, honor, victory, but never love. Not until you challenged me in that dungeon cell, with nothing but your dignity and truth as weapons." Evelyn felt tears gathering in her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in this moment that demanded strength. "We barely know each other," she whispered, though her heart argued otherwise. "I know all I need to know," Aldrich replied, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "I know your courage, your intelligence, your compassion for people who once called for your death. I know that in you I have found not just an ally, but a match for my soul." Outside the tent, the sounds of the camp faded away. In this small, private space, illuminated by flickering lamplight, the war seemed momentarily distant. Evelyn leaned forward, her free hand gently touching Aldrich's cheek. "I rode through enemy territory, risked capture and death, because the thought of a world without you in it was unbearable," she admitted. "I have known respect, duty, even contentment in my life, but never this consuming fear of loss, this need to be near someone despite all reason." "If that is not love," Aldrich said softly, "then I do not know what is." The last barrier between them dissolved with those words. Evelyn bent down, her lips meeting his in a kiss both gentle and fierce. Aldrich's hand moved to cradle the back of her neck, holding her close despite his injuries. The kiss deepened, conveying all the emotion that had built between them across weeks of shared danger and growing trust. When they finally parted, both breathless, Aldrich smiled, a true smile that transformed his usually stern features. "Now, I have reason enough to survive this war." A commotion outside interrupted the moment. Voices raised in alarm, the clang of weapons being drawn. Evelyn rose swiftly, reaching for the dagger at her belt. Sir Roland burst through the tent flaps, his armor spattered with fresh blood. He froze momentarily at the sight of Evelyn before addressing his king. "Your Majesty, Osric's forces have regrouped. They're attacking our southern flank, and—" He hesitated, glancing at Evelyn. "Speak freely, Roland," Aldrich commanded, struggling to sit up fully. "Lady Evelyn has my complete trust. Spies report that Osric himself leads the charge. He claims to have captured Lady Evelyn and threatens to execute her if you don't surrender yourself." "Clearly a bluff," Evelyn said with grim satisfaction. "One easily disproven." "Not so easily," Aldrich countered, his tactical mind working despite his injuries. "Your presence here must remain secret. If Osric learns you've left Winthorpe's protection, he'll stop at nothing to capture you." "He believes I've already been captured," she pointed out. "No," Roland clarified. "He claims to have captured you, but our scouts have seen no evidence. It's likely a ploy to draw His Majesty into the open." Aldrich's expression darkened. "Or to test whether you remain at Winthorpe. If you're discovered here, he'll know the Castle's defenses are weakened." He turned to Roland. "Who knows of Lady Evelyn's arrival?" "Only myself, the guards outside, and Sir Gawain's party," Roland assured him. "Keep it that way," Aldrich ordered. "Spread word that we've received confirmation of Lady Evelyn's safety at Winthorpe. Let Osric's lie expose itself." He attempted to rise from the cot, but faltered, his face contorting with pain. "You cannot fight," Evelyn said firmly, pressing him gently back. "Not yet. My men need to see me," he insisted. "They need you alive more than they need you visible," she countered. "Sir Roland can command the defense. You will direct from here, where your mind remains sharp even if your body needs healing." Roland nodded in agreement. "The lady speaks wisely, Your Majesty. I can report regularly and convey your orders." Aldrich reluctantly conceded. "Set up the map table here, and bring Sir Gawain. His rangers will be valuable against Osric's flanking maneuvers." As Roland departed to carry out these instructions, Evelyn helped Aldrich into a sitting position, arranging pillows to support his wounded side. Their hands lingered together longer than necessary, both drawing strength from the contact. "This changes nothing of what was said between us," Aldrich assured her softly. "If anything, it makes our words more urgent." "We will speak of it again," Evelyn promised, "when victory is secured." The tent transformed into a command center as maps were brought in and messengers began arriving with reports from the battlefield. Evelyn stayed by Aldrich's side, offering insights based on her knowledge of Osric's tactics. The king's commanders, initially surprised by her presence, quickly came to value her observations. "He's dividing his forces," she noted, studying the positions marked on the main map. "That's unlike Osric. He prefers concentrated strength." "Unless he's expecting reinforcements," Aldrich reasoned, his color improving as the medicine took effect. "The Eldamar contingent we drove back yesterday could be regrouping." Through the night, they worked together as reports continued flowing in. Evelyn watched with admiration as Aldrich commanded his forces despite his injuries, his mind sharp and decisive. In turn, she felt his gaze on her when she spoke, the respect in his eyes warming her more than any fire could. By dawn, their strategy had paid off. Osric's divided forces had been outmaneuvered on both flanks, forced to retreat toward the eastern forests with significant losses. More importantly, his lie about capturing Evelyn had been exposed, damaging his credibility among even his own troops. As the first light of morning filtered through the tent's canvas, Aldrich reached for Evelyn's hand once more. Exhausted but triumphant, they shared a moment of quiet connection before the next phase of the war would demand their attention. "With you by my side," he murmured, "I believe victory is not just possible, but inevitable." Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. "Not just victory in war," she replied softly, "but perhaps in life as well." Outside, the camp stirred with renewed purpose. The presence of the woman wearing the king's silver wolf brooch had not gone unnoticed. Whispers spread among the soldiers, tales of her journey through enemy territory, of her counsel that had turned the tide of battle, of the way the king looked at her with something more than alliance in his eyes. A new chapter in the war had begun, one where Evelyn and Aldrich would face their enemies together, their newfound bond giving them strength that neither had possessed alone. A week had passed since the Battle of Ravenscrag, and the war had reached a crucial juncture. In the war tent at the center of the royal encampment, now relocated to the highlands overlooking Blackmere Castle, Aldrich stood tall and resolute. His recovery, though not complete, had progressed remarkably, a testament to both Lady Matilda's healing tincture and his own iron will. The bandages around his torso were less bulky now, and he moved with only an occasional wince to betray his lingering pain. Around the large oak table, spread with detailed maps of Blackmere and its surroundings, stood his most trusted commanders. Sir Roland, his armor freshly polished for the occasion; Lord Gareth, recently returned from securing the northern passes; and Sir Gawain, whose rangers had spent days scouting every approach to Osric's ancestral home. And beside Aldrich, her presence now accepted without question, stood Evelyn. "Osric has retreated to his final stronghold," Aldrich declared, pointing to Blackmere Castle's imposing silhouette on the map. "He's called in every remaining ally, every mercenary still willing to fight for his gold. Our scouts report nearly 3,000 men within those walls." "The castle was built to withstand sieges," Evelyn added, her intimate knowledge of the fortress proving invaluable. "The western approach is particularly well defended, with triple walls and oil channels that can be ignited to create a barrier of flame." Lord Gareth frowned, his weathered face creasing with concern. "A frontal assault would cost us dearly in lives, Your Majesty." "Which is why we won't attack as Osric expects," Aldrich replied, his eyes meeting Evelyn's briefly, a silent communication passing between them. "Lady Evelyn has proposed an alternative approach." All eyes turned to her as she indicated a section of the map showing the castle's eastern side. "The east wall appears strongest, with its sheer drop to the river below. Osric has always considered it impregnable and stations fewer men there. But there exists a hidden passage, a narrow tunnel built by his grandfather as an escape route during the last civil war." "And you know of this passage?" Sir Roland asked, his tone betraying no skepticism. "Merely tactical interest," Evelyn nodded. "As Duchess of Blackmere, I was entrusted with certain secrets, though Osric likely believes I never paid attention to such matters." A hint of grim satisfaction colored her voice. "The tunnel entrance lies beneath the old chapel, half a mile from the castle walls. It emerges in the wine cellars. A small force could infiltrate under cover of darkness," Aldrich continued, "while our main army creates a diversion at the western gate. Once inside, they would open the eastern postern door, allowing a second force to enter." "And who would lead this infiltration?" Lord Gareth asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "I will," Aldrich stated firmly, silencing the immediate protests with a raised hand. "This mission requires stealth, not numbers. I'll take 30 of our best fighters, men who can move silently and strike decisively." Evelyn had expected this decision, had even helped formulate the strategy, but still felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. "The tunnel has not been used in decades," she cautioned. "We cannot be certain of its condition." "Which is why you will guide us," Aldrich replied, his tone making it clear this point was not open for debate. A tense silence fell over the war tent. The commanders exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of both their king and Lady Evelyn undertaking such a dangerous mission. It was Sir Roland who finally spoke, his loyalty to Aldrich overriding his reservations. "When do we move, Your Majesty?" "Tomorrow night," Aldrich answered. "The new moon will provide the darkness we need. Lord Gareth will command the main force. At the western gate, Sir Gawain's rangers will secure our retreat route should the plan fail." He straightened, his presence filling the tent. "Make your preparations. We attack at midnight." As the commanders filed out to relay orders to their men, Evelyn remained by the map table, her fingers tracing the outline of Blackmere. Once her home, now the fortress of her enemy. Aldrich moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You disapprove of my leading the infiltration," he stated quietly. "I understand the necessity," she replied, keeping her voice equally low. "Your presence will inspire the men, and you're skilled enough with a blade to justify your place among them. But yes, I fear for you." Aldrich's hand found hers where it rested on the map, his calloused fingers entwining with her more slender ones. "As I fear for you, yet we both know you must guide us through that tunnel." Evelyn turned to face him fully, searching his eyes. "Osric will expect me to be with you. He knows I would never willingly return to Blackmere otherwise, which is why he must not capture either of us." Aldrich said grimly, "If I fall, you must promise to retreat immediately. Sir Roland has instructions to ensure your safety above all else." "And if I fall?" she challenged. A shadow of genuine pain crossed Aldrich's face. "Then I would ensure Osric pays such a price that songs of vengeance would be sung for generations." His raw honesty stripped away her remaining defenses. Evelyn stepped closer, her free hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. "Then let us both survive, and write a different kind of song." They stood thus for a long moment, the war and its demands temporarily held at bay by the force of their connection. When Aldrich finally spoke again, his voice had softened. "In my 42 years, I have planned hundreds of battles, made thousands of life-or-death decisions, yet none has weighed on me as heavily as placing you in danger tomorrow night." "I choose this danger," Evelyn reminded him, "as I chose to ride to Ravenscrag, as I choose to stand beside you now." A call from outside the tent reluctantly drew them apart. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. Weapons were sharpened, armor adjusted, detailed instructions given to each component of their forces. As dusk fell, an unusual calm settled over the camp, the quiet anticipation before decisive action. Evelyn found herself in a small tent that had been assigned to her, donning the dark leather armor Sir Roland had procured for her. More practical than decorative, the fitted cuirass and greaves would provide some protection while allowing the movement she would need in the confined space of the tunnel. At her waist hung a short sword and dagger, weapons she had practiced with daily since arriving at the camp, determined not to be defenseless in the coming confrontation. A gentle knock preceded Aldrich's entrance. He too was dressed for battle, though his armor was finer, blackened steel with the silver wolf emblem etched subtly on the breastplate rather than prominently displayed. In the dim lantern light, his features seemed carved from stone, all kingly artifice stripped away to reveal the warrior beneath. "The men are ready," he said. "We march in an hour to reach position by midnight." Evelyn nodded, making a final adjustment to her leather vambrace. "I'm prepared." Aldrich moved closer, his eyes taking in her battle-ready appearance with a mixture of pride and concern. "You look like one of my elite guard," he observed, "though far more beautiful." Despite the tension of the moment, Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips. "Flattery before battle, Your Majesty." "Truth before what may be our last night," he corrected softly. Then, with a deliberate movement, he removed something from a pouch at his belt, a small silver pendant on a leather cord. "I want you to wear this." Evelyn recognized it immediately as the pendant he had mentioned in his letter, the one he kept next to his heart. A delicately crafted wolf's head, similar to her brooch but smaller, more personal. "This has been passed through my family for generations," Aldrich explained as he placed it around her neck. "Given only to those we vow to protect with our lives." The weight of the pendant against her skin felt like a sacred trust. "I will return it to you when we stand victorious in Blackmere's Great Hall," she promised. "Keep it," he insisted. "Whether we live or die tomorrow, it belongs with you now." The finality in his tone made her heart constrict. Evelyn reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, now rough with several days' growth of beard. "Do not speak of death, Aldrich. Not tonight." "What would you have me speak of instead?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Life," she whispered. "The life we might build when this war is won." Something fierce and tender ignited in Aldrich's eyes. Without words, he drew her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that spoke of all they stood to lose and gain in the coming battle. Unlike their first kiss, tentative and gentle. Despite its passion, this one contained a desperate intensity, a claiming, a promise, a defiance against the shadow of mortality that hung over them both. When they finally parted, breathless, Aldrich rested his forehead against hers. "When Blackmere is taken and Osric defeated, I would have you rule at my side, not as a duchess restored to her former position, but as my queen." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given all that had passed between them, still stunned Evelyn with its directness. "You cannot mean to—" "I have never been more certain of anything," he interrupted. "I love you, Evelyn, not for your strategic value or your knowledge of our enemy, but for the woman you are. Brave, compassionate, brilliant." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but Evelyn blinked them back, refusing to show such vulnerability before battle. "And I love you, Aldrich, not for your crown or power, but for the man I've discovered beneath the legend. Honorable, just, and far more gentle than the world suspects." A call from outside signaled that their time alone was ending. Reality intruded once more. The war, the danger, the knight's mission that could not be delayed. Aldrich stepped back, though his eyes remained fixed on hers. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, his voice regaining its commanding tone, "know that these past weeks with you have given me more joy than all my previous years combined." "Then let us fight to ensure we have many more such weeks ahead," Evelyn replied, squaring her shoulders. Together they emerged from the tent to find Sir Roland and the infiltration team assembled, 30 of Winthorpe's finest warriors, each face solemn with the knowledge of what lay ahead. In the distance, Lord Gareth's larger force was already beginning its silent march toward the western approach. As they moved out under the cover of darkness, Evelyn felt the weight of the silver, pendant against her skin, a constant reminder of Aldrich's trust and love. The night air was crisp with early frost, the stars obscured by clouds that aided their need for concealment. Beside her, Aldrich moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his earlier injury seemingly forgotten in the focus of impending battle. They reached the old chapel shortly before midnight. Long abandoned, its stone walls crumbling and roof partially collapsed, it appeared an unlikely place to hide the entrance to a secret passage. Evelyn led them to the ancient altar, pushing aside the heavy stone with the help of 2 soldiers to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "From here we move in single file," she instructed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The tunnel runs straight for nearly half a mile before curving upward toward the castle cellars. There are 2 iron gates along the way. I have the keys." "Osric never knew I possessed." Aldrich nodded, then turned to his men. "Light only 1 torch at a time. Keep your weapons ready but sheathed until we reach the cellars. And remember, our objective is to open the eastern postern for our main force. Engage the enemy only when necessary until reinforcements arrive." With a final glance at Evelyn, he gestured toward the dark opening. "Lead us home, my lady." Taking a deep breath, Evelyn descended into the passage that would lead them either to victory or doom. The silver pendant seemed to pulse against her skin with each beat of her heart, as she took the first steps toward the final confrontation with the man who had betrayed her, and toward the future she now dared to imagine with the king who had saved her in more ways than one. The tunnel air hung heavy with damp and decay, the single torch carried by Sir Roland casting eerie shadows on ancient stone walls. Evelyn led the way, her steps cautious but certain, memories of the castle blueprint guiding her through the key, narrow passage. Behind her came Aldrich, his presence a steady comfort in the oppressive darkness, followed by the silent line of soldiers. "The first gate should be just ahead," she whispered, pausing at a bend in the tunnel. True to her word, an iron barrier loomed before them, its metal corroded, but still formidable. Evelyn withdrew a heavy key from the pouch at her belt, inserting it into the ancient lock with practiced ease. The mechanism resisted at first, then yielded with a reluctant groan that seemed deafening in the confined space. "Halt," Aldrich commanded softly, raising his hand. The soldiers froze, weapons half drawn, as they listened for any response from above. When only silence answered, he nodded for Evelyn to proceed. They continued through the passage, the air growing colder as they progressed deeper beneath Blackmere Castle. Water dripped from the ceiling in places, forming slick patches on the stone floor that demanded careful footing. Despite the chill, Evelyn felt perspiration beading on her forehead, not from exertion, but from the growing tension of what awaited them. At the second gate, she paused again. "Beyond this point, we are directly under the castle cellars," she explained in a hushed tone. "The passage rises steeply, ending behind a false wine rack in the eastern storage room." Aldrich moved closer, his voice meant for her ears alone. "Are you certain Osric doesn't know of this entrance?" "He never showed interest in the old castle plans," Evelyn replied, working the key in the second lock. "His arrogance made him believe Blackmere impregnable from all sides. This passage was considered a family secret, shared only with the lady of the castle in case evacuation became necessary." The second gate swung open with less resistance than the first. As they moved forward, the tunnel began its upward slope, the centuries-old stairs worn smooth by occasional use. The torch revealed cobwebs undisturbed for years, a promising sign that their approach remained undetected. At last, they reached the end of the passage, a solid stone wall that appeared no different from the others. Evelyn ran her fingers along the rough surface until she found what she sought, a small depression barely visible to the eye. Pressing firmly, she triggered a hidden mechanism. With a soft rumble, a section of the wall shifted inward. "Wait," she cautioned as Sir Roland moved to push through. "Let me listen first." Pressing her ear to the narrow opening, Evelyn heard only the distant sounds of the castle at night. A guard's footsteps far above, the muffled voice of a servant. The cellar itself seemed deserted. "It's clear," she whispered. "But we must move the wine rack that conceals this entrance from the other side." Aldrich nodded to two of his strongest men, who eased through the gap and carefully shifted the heavy wooden structure just enough to allow passage. One by one, the infiltration team emerged into the vast wine cellar of Blackmere Castle, weapons now drawn and senses alert for any threat. Evelyn felt a strange disconnection as she stood once more in the castle that had been her prison disguised as a home. The familiar stone walls and vaulted ceilings now seemed alien after her time at Winthorpe. She pushed aside the memories of isolation and betrayal, focusing instead on the mission at hand. "The eastern postern is 3 levels up," she informed Aldrich, pointing to a narrow spiral staircase in the corner. "We'll need to pass through the kitchens and the servants' quarters to reach it. Roland, take 10 men and secure our path," Aldrich ordered. "Silence any guards you encounter. We cannot risk raising the alarm too soon." As Roland and his men disappeared up the staircase, Aldrich turned to Evelyn. In the dim light of the cellar, his face appeared carved from shadow, his eyes intense with focused determination. "You know this castle better than anyone," he said. "Is there anything else we should be aware of? Any changes Osric might have made to the defenses?" Evelyn considered carefully. "The servants' hall has only one entrance and exit. If we're discovered, we could be trapped there. There's an alternative route through the old armory, but it would take us dangerously close to the main guard quarters." Before Aldrich could respond, Roland reappeared at the top of the stairs, gesturing for them to follow. The first hurdle had been cleared without incident. Keeping close to the wall, the group ascended silently, emerging into the deserted kitchen. At this late hour, only embers glowed in the great hearth, the castle's inhabitants long since retired. They moved through the familiar spaces like ghosts, stopping at each corner to ensure their path remained clear. The servants' hall proved as empty as Evelyn had hoped, most of the staff having fled when the war reached Blackmere's doorstep. As they approached the corridor leading to the eastern postern, a noise froze them in place. Voices, growing louder, coming toward them from an intersecting hallway. Aldrich signaled for his men to press against the wall, extinguishing their single torch. In the sudden darkness, Evelyn felt his hand find hers. Squeezing once in reassurance, 2 guards rounded, The corner, their conversation cutting off abruptly at the sight of armed intruders. Before they could shout a warning, Roland and another soldier sprang forward, their daggers finding vulnerable gaps in the guard's armor with lethal precision. The men crumpled without a sound, their weapons clattering softly on the stone floor. "Move." "Quickly," Aldrich commanded. "Our time grows short." The eastern postern door was smaller than the main gates, designed for discreet comings and goings rather than grand entrances. 2 guards stood watch outside, visible through the narrow window set into the thick wood. Roland dispatched them, with arrows fired through the opening, their bodies falling silently into the snow. "The signal," Aldrich reminded them as they unbarred the heavy door. One of his men raised a small horn to his lips, sounding 3 short blasts that would alert their waiting forces. Outside, the night remained still for several heartbeats, then shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the surrounding forest. 50 of Winthorpe's elite fighters approached swiftly, their black cloaks blending with the night. At the same moment, a commotion rose from the western wall. Lord Gareth's diversion had begun. "We have perhaps 10 minutes before Osric realizes." "The western attack is a feint," Aldrich said, drawing his sword. "Roland, take 20 men and secure the main courtyard. The rest of you with me, we make for the great hall." Evelyn moved to follow Aldrich, but he placed a restraining hand on her arm. "You should remain here with the rear guard. It's too dangerous." "I know every corridor, every hidden passage in this castle," she interrupted, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "And I have as much right to confront Osric as you do." Something in her expression must have convinced him, for after a brief hesitation, Aldrich nodded. "Stay close to me." The castle erupted into chaos as alarm bells began to ring. Soldiers scrambled. From barracks, many half-dressed and disoriented, easy targets for the disciplined Winthorpe fighters. The element of surprise gave Aldrich's forces a crucial advantage as they cut through Blackmere's defenses with ruthless efficiency. They fought, their way toward the Great Hall, where Osric would most likely be coordinating his response to the attack. As they rounded the final corner, a dozen of Osric's personal guards formed a protective line before the massive double doors. "For Winthorpe!" Aldrich shouted, raising his sword. The clash of steel filled the corridor as the 2 forces met. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, her short sword drawn but held defensively as she had been trained. She watched in awe as Aldrich fought, his movements fluid and precise despite his recent injuries, each strike finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Within minutes the guards lay defeated, and Aldrich stood before the great hall doors, his armor splattered with blood but his posture unbowed. He turned to Evelyn, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, steeling herself for what lay beyond. The doors burst open under the combined force of 3 soldiers. Inside, the great hall of Blackmere Castle stood illuminated by blazing torches, its high ceiling lost in shadow. At the far end, seated in the ornate chair that had once been Evelyn's by right, sat Duke Osric. He appeared thinner than when Evelyn had last seen him, his once handsome face hardened by bitterness and strain. His golden hair, streaked now with gray, hung limp around his shoulders. Despite the late hour, he was fully dressed in battle. Armor, though he had clearly not expected enemies to penetrate so deeply into his stronghold. "Aldrich," he acknowledged, rising slowly from the chair. "I see you've brought my wife back to me." "How thoughtful." "Ex-wife," Evelyn corrected, stepping forward to stand beside Aldrich. "By your own actions, you severed any bond between us when you sentenced me to die in Winthorpe's dungeons." Osric's eyes narrowed as they fixed on the silver wolf pendant at her throat. "I see you found a new master quickly enough. Tell me, does the mighty King Aldrich know he beds a serpent?" Aldrich's sword point rose slightly. "Choose your next words with care, Osric. They may be your last." A harsh laugh escaped the Duke's lips. "Always so righteous, Aldrich. Yet here you are, stealing another man's wife while your kingdom burns." "Your lies no longer hold power," Evelyn said calmly. "Eldamar's forces are in retreat. Your conspiracy has failed. Surrender now, and you may yet be granted mercy." "Mercy?" Osric spat the word like poison. "From the woman who betrayed me? From the king who stole what was mine?" His Hand moved to the sword at his hip, drawing it in one fluid motion. I think not. Behind him, a hidden door in the paneling swung open, revealing a small contingent of soldiers, his final reserve. Kill them all, Osric commanded. Except the woman. She is mine to deal with. The battle erupted anew, more ferocious than before, in the confined space of the great hall. Aldric's men, though outnumbered, fought with the determination of those who sensed victory within reach. Evelyn found herself forced backward by the press of bodies, separated from Aldric by the chaos of combat. A familiar voice cut through the din. Did you truly believe you could escape me? Osric stood before her, his sword raised, eyes burning with hatred. Evelyn raised her own blade, grateful now for the hours of practice she had insisted upon. I don't need to escape you anymore, she replied steadily. I've outgrown my fear of you, Osric. He lunged forward, his attack powerful but predictable. Evelyn sidestepped, her smaller weapon allowing greater maneuverability in the crowded hall. She had no illusions about defeating him in direct combat. She needed only to defend herself until Aldric or his men could reach her. You were nothing when I found you. Osric snarled, circling her like a predator. A nobleman's daughter with a pretty face and useful connections. Everything you had came from me. Everything I suffered came from you. Evelyn countered, parrying another thrust. But everything I am now, I built myself. From the ashes of your betrayal, their blades met again, the impact jarring her arm to the shoulder. Osric pressed his advantage, driving her back toward a corner where she would have no room to maneuver. Desperation gave her strength as she fought to maintain distance, knowing that her only hope lay in delaying the inevitable. A shout from across the hall drew Osric's attention momentarily. Aldric, having dispatched his opponents, now fought toward them with grim determination. The distraction was all Evelyn needed. She darted forward, her dagger slipping from her sleeve into her left hand, finding the gap in Osric's armor below his raised arm. The Duke gasped, his forward momentum halted by the unexpected pain. His sword clattered to the floor as he clutched at the wound, disbelief written across his features. You, he choked, blood staining his lips. You would kill your husband? No, Evelyn said, stepping back as Aldric reached her side. I would bring a traitor to justice. Osric sank to his knees, his life bleeding out onto the stone floor of the hall he had coveted so greatly. Around them the fighting had ceased, Aldric's forces having overwhelmed the remaining defenders. Surrender, Osric, Aldric commanded, his sword at the Duke's throat. Face trial for your crimes against Winthorpe and its people. For a moment, it seemed Osric might accept his defeat. Then, with startling speed for a wounded man, he reached for a hidden dagger in his boot, lunging toward Evelyn with the last of his strength. Aldric's sword moved faster, intercepting the attack with lethal precision. Osric collapsed fully, his final breath escaping in a rattling sigh as his eyes fixed on Evelyn with eternal hatred. Silence fell over the great hall of Blackmere Castle. Evelyn stood motionless, her gaze locked on the man who had once been her husband, now nothing more than another casualty of his own ambition. Beside her, Aldric lowered his sword, his free hand finding hers in silent support. It's finished, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. Yes, finally finished. Outside, dawn was breaking over the castle walls. Through the high windows of the hall, the first golden rays of sunlight spilled. Across the blood-stained floor, a new day dawning on a changed world. Spring had come to Winthorpe, painting the castle grounds with delicate blossoms and fresh greenery that belied the harshness of the war just ended. 2 months had passed since Osric's death at Blackmere, 2 months of rebuilding, healing, and establishing a fragile peace with Eldamar, whose forces had retreated across the border once their ally fell. The great hall of Winthorpe Castle hummed with activity as lords and ladies from across the kingdom gathered for the first formal court session since King Aldric's triumphant return. Evelyn stood near a tall window, momentarily removed from the crowd, watching as nobles jockeyed for position and favor in the new order. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, her auburn hair arranged in an elegant style befitting her undefined, but clearly elevated status. The silver wolf pendant hung openly at her throat, a clear signal of the king's favor. "They watch you, you know," came Lady Matilda's voice as the older woman joined her by the window. Some with admiration, others with envy, all with curiosity. Evelyn smiled. "I've grown accustomed to being watched, though the reasons have certainly improved." "Indeed." Matilda's shrewd eyes twinkled. "Being observed as the king's trusted advisor is rather different from being scrutinized as a suspected traitor." "Advisor," Evelyn repeated, the word carrying a weight of meaning beyond its simple definition. Though Aldrich had spoken of more permanent arrangements that night before the battle at Blackmere, no formal announcement had been made. The demands of securing the kingdom after war had left little time for personal matters. Matilda patted her hand gently. "My nephew is many things, a brilliant strategist, a formidable warrior, a just ruler, but he has never been particularly skilled at matters of the heart. Give him time." Before Evelyn could respond, a hush fell over the hall as King Aldrich entered through the main doors. He moved with the easy confidence of a man in his prime, his recent battle wounds now fully healed. The crown rested upon his dark hair, still streaked with silver at the temples, and he wore formal robes of deep blue and silver over finely crafted armor. A reminder that though peace had been won, vigilance remained necessary. His eyes found Evelyn immediately, a brief smile softening his otherwise regal expression. With a subtle gesture, he beckoned her to join him as he took his seat upon the throne. "My lords and ladies," Aldrich began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, "we gather today to address the future of our kingdom after months of conflict. Winthorpe stands strong, but there is much work to be done." For the next hour, Aldrich presided over a series of announcements and declarations. New appointments were made to replace those lords who had betrayed the crown. Arrangements for the reconstruction of war-damaged provinces were outlined. Treaties with neighboring kingdoms, including a cautious peace with Eldamar, were formalized. Throughout it all, Evelyn stood slightly to his right, occasionally leaning down to offer a quiet word when asked. The court watched this dynamic with intense interest, noting how the king valued her counsel, and how naturally she assumed this position of influence. As the formal proceedings concluded, Aldrich rose from his throne. "Before we end this session, there is one final matter I wish to address." His tone shifted, becoming more personal. "The recent conflict has taught us many lessons about loyalty, about courage, and about the true nature of leadership." Evelyn felt a strange tension in the air, a collective holding of breath among the assembled nobles. Aldrich turned slightly toward her, his blue eyes intent. Lady Evelyn of Blackmere stood accused of treason when first she entered these halls. Yet it was her unwavering honor that revealed the true conspiracy threatening our kingdom. Her courage on the battlefield and wisdom in the council chamber proved instrumental in our victory. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Even those who had once viewed her with suspicion could not deny her contributions to the war effort. "Therefore," Aldrich continued, "I hereby declare that all lands and titles formerly held by Duke Osric are to be restored to Lady Evelyn, with the additional grant of the eastern provinces as a duchy in her own right, independent of her former marriage." Surprised and moved, Evelyn bowed her head in acknowledgement of this unexpected honor. Yet Aldrich had not finished. "However," he said, his voice taking on a different quality that caused her to look up sharply, "I would offer an alternative arrangement, one that would serve the kingdom even better." The hall grew so silent that the distant call of birds could be heard through the open windows. Aldrich turned fully to face Evelyn now, seemingly unconcerned with the hundreds of witnesses to this moment. "Lady Evelyn, you have proven yourself not merely a capable administrator or a valuable ally, but a true partner in both war and peace. The people of Winthorpe would be fortunate indeed to have you serve not as a duchess, but as their queen." A collective gasp rose from the assembled court. Though rumors had circulated about the king's affection for Lady Evelyn, few had expected such a public declaration, or such a swift transition from wartime alliance to proposed marriage. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her composure maintained despite the shock of hearing spoken aloud what had only been privately discussed in a moment of pre-battle emotion. Aldrich's eyes held hers, patient yet questioning. "Your Majesty honors me beyond measure," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Before I answer, I would ask, do you make this offer for the good of your kingdom, or for reasons of your own?" A smile tugged at the corner of Aldrich's mouth, appreciation for her directness evident in his expression. "Both," he answered honestly. "Winthrop would benefit greatly from your intelligence and compassion as its queen. But I would benefit far more from having the woman I love at my side for all the days to come." The uncharacteristic openness of this declaration, made before the entire court, left no doubt as to the sincerity of his feelings. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, dissolving the last vestiges of uncertainty. "Then I accept," she said simply, "both the crown and the man who wears it." The hall erupted in cheers and applause, the nobility of Winthrop quick to adapt to this new reality. Aldrich took Evelyn's hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both regal and deeply personal. As the court session disbanded into an impromptu celebration, Aldrich led Evelyn through a side door into a small antechamber where they could speak privately for a moment. "You might have warned me," she chided gently once they were alone. "And deprive myself of seeing you genuinely surprised for once?" Aldrich replied, his formal demeanor giving way to the warmer personality few were privileged to witness. "Besides, I feared if I spoke to you privately first, you might have found some practical reason to refuse me." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Such as the political complications of a king marrying a woman once accused of treason? Or perhaps the whispers that will inevitably suggest I manipulated my way to the throne?" "Precisely such reasons," he agreed, taking both her hands in his, "all of which pale in comparison to the simple truth that I cannot imagine ruling without you, nor living without loving you." "When did the fearsome Aldrich of Winthrop become such a poet?" she teased, though her eyes shone with emotion. "When a certain prisoner dared to look him in the eye and speak truth to power," he answered, drawing her closer. "You changed everything, Evelyn. You reminded me that a king is still a man beneath the crown." Their kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the celebration waiting beyond the door and the new roles they must now assume publicly. When they parted, Evelyn asked, "When do you propose this wedding take place?" "The summer solstice," Aldrich replied without hesitation. "The kingdom could use a celebration, and it gives us 3 months to prepare. 3 months to transform a former prisoner into a suitable queen," Evelyn mused. "Lady Matilda will be beside herself with the preparations." Aldrich laughed, the sound still rare enough to be precious. "My aunt has been planning this since the day you arrived at Ravenscrag. I believe she has already commissioned the royal seamstresses for your coronation gown." They returned to the great hall to find the atmosphere transformed. Musicians had appeared, wine flowed freely, and the nobility who had once regarded Evelyn with suspicion now approached with congratulations and pledges of fealty. The announcement had been unexpected but not unwelcome. The people of Winthrop had seen enough of war and craved the stability and hope that a royal marriage represented. Yet not all faces showed genuine pleasure at the news. From across the hall, Evelyn noticed Lord Talbot in deep conversation with several other nobles, their expressions serious despite the festive atmosphere. As her gaze fell upon them, they quickly dispersed, offering stiff bows in her direction. "Not everyone welcomes the idea of a new queen," she murmured to Aldrich as they moved through the crowd. "Talbot had hopes of offering his daughter as a potential bride," Aldrich replied quietly. "He'll adjust to disappointment. They all will. And if they don't, then we face it together, as we faced Osric." His hand rested briefly at the small of her back, a subtle gesture of support. "I did not survive battles and betrayals to be intimidated by court politics." The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity to Winthrop Castle. Preparations for the royal wedding consumed the household, with delegations arriving daily from across the kingdom and beyond. Evelyn found herself at the center of a whirlwind of fittings, protocol lessons, and diplomatic introductions. Through it all, she maintained the quiet strength that had first drawn Aldrich to her. She met with the common people as often as with nobility, listening to their concerns and establishing herself as an accessible figure despite her elevation. The silver wolf pendant remained at her throat, a personal symbol in contrast to the formal royal jewels she would soon be entitled to wear. One evening, as spring edged towards summer, Evelyn stood on the castle battlements watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The weight of her new responsibilities sometimes pressed heavily upon her, and she sought solitude to gather her thoughts. "I thought I might find you here," came Aldrich's voice as he joined her at the stone parapet. "You always seek high places when troubled." Evelyn smiled, not surprised that he had noticed this pattern. "The perspective helps. From here the kingdom seems both vast and manageable at once." "What troubles you?" he asked, his shoulder brushing against hers as they stood side by side. She considered deflecting the question, but chose honesty instead. "I received another anonymous note today. The third this week." Aldrich's expression darkened. "Threats?" "Warnings," she corrected, "that I should beware of enemies within the court. That not all who smile in my presence wish me well." "We expected this," he reminded her. "Osric's allies have not all been identified. Some remain in positions of influence, biding their time." Evelyn turned to face him fully. "It's not fear for myself that concerns me, Aldrich. It's fear for what our marriage might cost you in terms of support. There are whispers that you chose me for my beauty rather than my worth, that I've bewitched you somehow." A sardonic smile touched his lips. "If admiring your intelligence, courage, and integrity constitutes bewitchment, then I am happily enchanted." His expression grew more serious. "Evelyn, every monarch faces opposition. Every decision I make displeases someone. Choosing you as my queen is the one decision I am absolutely certain is right, for me and for Winthorpe." His conviction eased her concerns, as it always did. Evelyn leaned into him slightly, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Then we continue as planned." "We do," he agreed, his arm encircling her waist. "And we remain vigilant. Sir Roland has increased security throughout the castle, and Lady Matilda has her own network of informants watching for any hint of conspiracy." As darkness fell over Winthorpe, Evelyn and Aldrich remained on the battlements, their silhouettes outlined against the deepening twilight. Below them, the castle buzzed with activity, preparing not just for a wedding, but for a new era. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced war. Together, their unlikely bond forged in adversity and strengthened by love. The royal bedchamber was bathed in early morning light as Evelyn stood before a tall mirror, servants making final adjustments to her elaborate gown. 3 days remained until the wedding, and preparations had reached a fever pitch throughout the castle. The chamber, once Aldrich's alone, had been expanded and redecorated to accommodate its soon-to-be shared status, though Evelyn would not officially move in until after the ceremony. "The seamstress has outdone herself," Lady Matilda remarked, circling Evelyn with a critical eye. The wedding gown was a masterpiece of silver and midnight blue, Winthorpe's colors, with delicate wolf emblems embroidered along the sweeping train. "Though I still say we should add more lace at the collar." Evelyn smiled, shaking her head. "Any more and I'll be unable to turn my head to look at my husband during the vows." "A bride needn't move," Matilda countered with a wink. "Simply stand and look beautiful while the men do all the talking." "I believe Aldrich expects rather more active participation from his queen," Evelyn replied, causing the servants to hide smiles behind their hands. The easy rapport between the future queen and the king's aunt had become well known throughout the household. A sharp knock interrupted their banter. Sir Roland entered, his expression instantly alerting Evelyn that something was amiss. "My ladies," he said with a bow, "forgive the intrusion, but His Majesty requests Lady Evelyn's presence in the council chamber immediately." Matilda frowned. "Surely whatever crisis has arisen can wait until after the fitting?" The wedding is mere days away. It concerns the wedding, my lady, Roland replied, his eyes meeting Evelyn's briefly. Specifically a threat against it. The servants were dismissed, and Evelyn quickly changed into a simpler gown of deep green. As she followed Roland through the castle corridors, she noted the increased guard presence, pairs of soldiers stationed at every intersection, their hands resting on sword hilts. "What's happened?" she asked quietly. "A plot discovered, my lady," Roland answered, keeping his voice low. "Beyond that, I think it best the king explain." The council chamber door was guarded by 4 of Aldrich's most trusted men. Inside, Evelyn found not the usual gathering of advisors, but only Aldrich, Lord Gareth, and a man she didn't recognize. Bound to a chair, his face bloodied from what had clearly been a forceful interrogation. Aldrich looked up as she entered, his expression grave, but softening slightly at the sight of her. "Evelyn, thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course." She moved to his side, eyeing the prisoner. "Who is this?" "A servant in Lord Talbot's household," Aldrich explained. "Caught this morning attempting to place poison in the wine reserved for our wedding feast." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "And has he revealed who ordered this treachery?" "He maintains it was his own idea," Lord Gareth said with evident skepticism. "Claims he bears a grudge against the crown for his father's death in the northern campaign years ago." The prisoner, a young man no older than 25, kept his eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "May I?" Evelyn asked, gesturing toward him. Aldrich nodded, though concern lined his features. "Be careful." Evelyn approached the bound man, her movements deliberate and calm. She stopped before him, waiting until he reluctantly raised his gaze to meet hers. "What is your name?" she asked gently. The unexpected kindness in her tone seemed to confuse him. "Thomas," he answered after a moment's hesitation. "Thomas," she repeated. "I understand you lost your father. I am truly sorry for that. War brings terrible losses to all sides." His eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by this response. "But I don't believe this plot was born from your grief," she continued, her voice still soft but firm. "Someone asked this of you. Perhaps someone who has power over you or your family. Someone who assured you that you would be protected if caught." Thomas swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. "Whoever sent you has abandoned you to your fate," Evelyn observed. "They will not come to your rescue. But if you speak the truth now, I give you my word that your family will be protected from any retaliation." A tense silence filled the chamber, as Thomas visibly struggled with his decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was Lord Talbot," he confessed. He said a former prisoner had no right to be queen, that her influence would weaken the kingdom and dishonor the crown." Aldrich stepped forward, his face hardening. "And the poison? Was it meant for Lady Evelyn alone?" Thomas shook his head, unable to meet the king's intense gaze. "For both of you, your majesty. Lord Talbot said a clean slate was needed, that new leadership would emerge from the tragedy." "Meaning himself," Gareth growled. "The ambitious dog has always coveted power." Aldrich turned to Roland, who had remained by the door. "Arrest Lord Talbot immediately. Bring him to the throne room, where he will answer these charges publicly. And ensure his household is secured. There may be others involved." As Roland departed to carry out the orders, Evelyn placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Thank you for your honesty. Your family will be moved to the Western Province, where they will be given land and protection, far from any who might seek revenge." The relief in the young man's eyes was palpable. "Thank you, my lady. I am sorry. I didn't want to do it. But my mother and sisters—" "You will still face punishment for your role," Aldrich interjected, though his tone had softened slightly. "But your cooperation will be considered when determining your sentence." Guards were summoned to return Thomas to his cell. As they led him away, Evelyn turned to Aldrich, her expression troubled. "Talbot is not acting alone," she said once the prisoner was gone. "He lacks the imagination for such a scheme." "Agreed. Aldrich replied, his hand finding hers in a brief, reassuring touch. This reaches deeper than one disgruntled lord. Lord Gareth, who had been studying a parchment on the council table, looked up with grim satisfaction. We may have our answer here. The manifest of Lord Talbot's recent visitors includes an envoy from Eldamar, supposedly on a trade mission. Eldamar? Evelyn repeated, the pieces falling into place. They signed the peace treaty, but never truly accepted defeat. And what better way to destabilize Winthorpe than to eliminate its king and future queen in one stroke? Aldrich's expression was thunderous, leaving a power vacuum that would inevitably lead to civil war. We must proceed carefully, Eveline cautioned. If we accuse Eldamar without irrefutable proof, we risk reigniting the war. Aldrich nodded, his strategic mind already formulating a plan. We begin with Talbot. His confession may lead us to others in the conspiracy. The confrontation with Lord Talbot unfolded that afternoon in the great throne room of Winthorpe Castle. The hall was filled with nobles and royal officials, hastily summoned to witness the proceedings. Aldrich sat upon the throne, crown upon his head and sword across his lap, a clear symbol of both his authority and his readiness to enforce justice. Evelyn stood beside him, her presence a deliberate statement that attempts to separate them had failed. Lord Talbot, a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and an habitually sour expression, was brought before the throne in chains. His usual arrogance had given way to nervous apprehension as he took in the solemn assembly. Lord Talbot of Eastmere, Aldrich began, his voice carrying throughout the hall. You stand accused of high treason against the crown. Evidence has been presented that you plotted to poison both myself and Lady Evelyn at our wedding feast, with the intent of throwing the kingdom into chaos. Murmurs of shock and outrage rippled through the gathered nobility. Talbot's face flushed deep red, his eyes darting around as if seeking allies among the crowd. Lies and slander, he protested. I have served Winthorpe faithfully for 30 years. I demand to know my accuser. At Aldrich's nod, Thomas was brought forward, his bonds removed, though guards remained close. The young servant repeated his confession clearly, describing in detail Talbot's instructions and the promised rewards for his family. When Thomas finished speaking, Evelyn stepped forward. We have also discovered correspondence between Lord D. Talbot and agents of Eldamar, she stated, holding up a sealed parchment. Documents found hidden in his estate detail plans for a new government to be established after the unfortunate tragedy of the royal wedding. Talbot's bluster collapsed in the face of this evidence. His shoulders sagged as he realized the completeness of his exposure. It was for the good of Winthorpe, he insisted, his voice weaker now. A king bewitched by a former prisoner, a woman, whose loyalty was suspect from the beginning. The kingdom deserves better leadership. And you presume to decide what the kingdom deserves? Aldrich's tone was dangerously quiet. You who conspired with our enemies while accepting my hospitality and protection. I acted with others who share my concerns. Talbot retorted, a last desperate attempt to spread the blame. Noble houses who see the danger in this misalliance. Name them, Aldrich commanded. Talbot's gaze turned calculating. Perhaps my memory might improve if certain considerations were made regarding my sentence. You mistake your position, Lord Talbot, Evelyn interjected, her voice clear and steady. You are not negotiating terms. You are being offered one final opportunity to serve your kingdom by revealing the full extent of this conspiracy. A tense silence fell over the hall as Talbot visibly weighed his options. Finally, with the resignation of a man who knew he was doomed regardless, he began to speak, naming names, detailing meetings, exposing the network of dissent that had festered within Winthorpe's court. By the time he finished, 4 more lords, and 2 of Aldrich's own advisors stood in chains beside him, their expressions ranging from defiance to shame. The evidence against each was presented methodically, leaving no room for denial. The penalty for high treason is death, Aldrich pronounced, his face impassive as he delivered the judgment. However, in recognition of your past services and your eventual cooperation, I commute your sentences to permanent exile. You will be stripped of titles and lands and transported to the distant eastern colonies, never to return to Winthorpe upon pain of immediate execution. The convicted conspirators were led away, their former peers watching in solemn silence. As the great doors closed behind them, Aldrich rose from his throne, addressing the remaining assembly. "Let this serve as both warning and reassurance," he declared. "A warning that no position, however exalted, places anyone above the law, and reassurance that Winthorpe's security remains my highest priority." His gaze swept the hall, meeting the eyes of his subjects. "The wedding will proceed as planned in 3 days' time. I invite all loyal subjects to join in the celebration of a new chapter for our kingdom." With that, he extended his hand to Evelyn, who took it and stood beside him as the court bowed in acknowledgement. Together they departed the throne room, maintaining regal composure until they reached the privacy of Aldrich's study. Once alone, Evelyn released a long breath, the tension of the day finally showing in her posture. 6 conspirators in your inner circle. It's worse than we feared. And likely more remain undiscovered, Aldrich agreed, removing his crown and placing it on his desk with uncharacteristic weariness. "But we've struck a significant blow to their network and sent a message to Eldamar that their interference will not be tolerated," Eveline added, moving to pour them both goblets of wine from a carafe that had been carefully tested by the royal taster. Aldrich accepted the wine gratefully, studying her over the rim of his goblet. "You handled yourself magnificently today. The people saw not just their king dispensing justice, but their future queen demonstrating wisdom and strength. I've had excellent teachers in both justice and strength," she replied with a small smile, "one of whom stands before me." He set down his wine and drew her into his arms, the formality of their public roles giving way to the genuine affection that had grown between them. 3 days, he murmured against her hair. 3 days until you are officially my queen." "I'm already yours," Evelyn whispered back, her arms tightening around him. "Crown or no crown." In the wake of the conspiracy's exposure, the final preparations for the royal wedding took on an almost defiant energy. The castle hummed with activity. Servants and nobles alike determined that the celebration would proceed flawlessly despite the recent turmoil. Additional security measures were implemented discreetly, with Sir Roland personally overseeing the protection of the royal couple. On the evening before the wedding, a grand banquet was held for visiting dignitaries and loyal nobility. Evelyn, resplendent in a gown of deep purple adorned with silver embroidery, sat beside Aldrich at the high table, accepting well wishes and gifts from a seemingly endless procession of guests. "Smile," Aldrich murmured during a brief lull, his hand covering hers beneath the table. "You look as though you're facing execution rather than marriage." Evelyn laughed softly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Is there such a difference? Both are life-changing events from which there is no escape." "I could still release you from our agreement," he suggested with mock seriousness. "Send you back to your family lands with a generous pension and my eternal gratitude. And deprive the kingdom of the wedding they've been anticipating for months?" She raised an eyebrow, playing along. "How terribly selfish of you to suggest it." Their private amusement was interrupted by the arrival of a final delegation, representatives from Eldamar, their expressions carefully neutral as they presented an ornate silver chalice as a wedding gift. The implicit message was clear. Despite the exposed conspiracy, diplomatic relations would continue, the fragile peace maintained for now. As the banquet concluded and guests departed for their chambers, Evelyn and Aldrich shared a final moment, alone in the quiet of the castle gardens. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony that would formally unite them as rulers of Winthorpe, sealing both their personal commitment and their political alliance. "Are you ready?" Aldrich asked simply, the question encompassing far more than the wedding itself. Evelyn looked up at the stars scattered across the velvet darkness of the night sky, then back to the man beside her, the king who had saved her from injustice, the warrior who had fought beside her, the man who had earned her heart through respect and shared purpose. "I am," she answered, her voice steady with conviction. "For whatever comes next, I am ready." Summer bloomed across Winthorpe in a riot of color and abundance. as if nature itself celebrated the new era that had begun with the royal wedding 3 months earlier. The ceremony had been everything the kingdom hoped for, magnificent in its pageantry yet authentic in the evident connection between king and queen. Even the most cynical courtiers had been moved by the obvious devotion in Aldrich's eyes as he placed the crown upon Evelyn's head, transforming the once accused traitor into the realm's most honored woman. In the months since, Queen Evelyn had established herself as far more than a decorative consort. The people had embraced her warmly, particularly after she implemented reforms to improve conditions in the poorest provinces. Villages devastated by war were being rebuilt with royal funds, and a new system of justice allowed common folk to bring grievances directly to appointed magistrates, rather than relying on the often corrupt local lords. On this particular morning, Evelyn sat in her private study adjacent to the royal chambers, reviewing reports from the eastern provinces. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the detailed maps and ledgers spread across her desk. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called, expecting a servant with the mid-morning refreshments she had requested. Instead, Lady Matilda appeared, her face alight with barely contained excitement. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she declared, closing the door firmly behind her. Evelyn smiled, setting aside her quill. "I've been exactly where I am every morning at this hour. What has you so animated, Matilda?" The older woman practically glided across the room, lowering her voice despite their privacy. "Is it true? The royal physician was seen leaving your chambers at dawn, and the kitchen has been instructed to modify your diet." Heat rose to Evelyn's cheeks. She had hoped to keep the news private for a few more weeks, at least until she could be certain. "Nothing escapes your notice, does it?" "Very little," Matilda agreed with a satisfied smile. "So it is true? Winthorpe will have an heir?" "It seems so," Evelyn confirmed, a mixture of joy and trepidation coloring her tone. "Though it's early yet. The physician believes I'm nearly 2 months along." Matilda clasped her hands together in delight. "Have you told Aldrich?" "Not yet. He returned from the northern tour only yesterday, and there were so many matters requiring his immediate attention." Evelyn rose from her desk, moving to the window that overlooked the castle gardens. "I wanted to choose the right moment. My dear, there is no wrong moment to tell a man he's to become a father," Matilda assured her, joining her at the window. "Especially when that man has waited 40 years to hear such news." Evelyn's hand drifted unconsciously to her abdomen, still flat beneath the folds of her emerald gown. "I know, it's just—" She hesitated, uncertain how to articulate her complex emotions. "You're afraid," Matilda observed gently. "Perfectly natural for any woman, let alone a queen whose child will one day rule a kingdom." "It's not just that," Evelyn admitted. "Things have been so peaceful these past months. The conspiracy thwarted, the kingdom healing. Part of me fears this news will somehow disturb that balance." Matilda's expression softened with understanding. "Life rarely remains in perfect balance for long, my dear. But change, even dramatic, change like welcoming a child, need not be feared, especially when that child represents the future Aldrich has fought so hard to secure." Before Evelyn could respond, another knock came at the door, more commanding than Matilda's had been. The familiar pattern identified the visitor even before the door opened to reveal Aldrich, dressed for court in formal attire, though his crown was absent. "Good morning," he greeted them, his keen eyes noting the sudden silence his arrival had precipitated. "Am I interrupting a state secret?" "Nothing so dramatic," Matilda replied smoothly, moving toward the door. "Merely women's talk that would bore a king to tears. If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to oversee for tonight's council dinner." As his aunt departed with a knowing smile, Aldrich turned to Evelyn with raised eyebrows. She seemed unusually pleased with herself, even for Matilda. "She often is," Evelyn deflected, returning to her desk to organize the scattered reports. "Did you need something, or were you simply seeking refuge from the petitioners I know are waiting in the great hall?" Aldrich laughed, the sound still rare enough to delight her. "Is it so obvious? Lord Harmond has cornered me 3 times already this morning about grazing rights on the western plains. The burden of being an accessible monarch, she teased. Some of her earlier tension easing in his presence. He moved closer, perching on the edge of her desk in a decidedly unkingly manner. In truth, I came to see if you would join me for a ride this afternoon. The weather is perfect, and I've had enough of stone walls and formal chambers since returning. The invitation surprised her. Aldrich was typically consumed with duties after returning from a provincial tour, catching up on all that had transpired in his absence. What about Lord Harmond and his grazing rights? The lords and their concerns will still be here tomorrow, Aldrich replied with a dismissive wave. I've spent 2 weeks inspecting flood damage and mediating disputes. I believe I've earned an afternoon with my wife. The casual way he claimed her as his wife, still novel enough to send a pleasant warmth through her, made Evelyn's decision. For her. Very well. A ride would be lovely. Excellent. He stood, looking more boyishly pleased than a fearsome warrior king had any right to. I'll have the horses prepared. We'll depart after the midday meal. As he turned to leave, Evelyn called after him, Aldrich, thank you. He paused, glancing back with a questioning look. For putting us first, even with all the demands on your time, she clarified. His expression softened, the public mask of kingship falling away completely. Always, he promised before departing. When Evelyn arrived at the stables that afternoon, she found Aldrich waiting with their favorite mounts, his massive black stallion and her more delicate chestnut mare. He had changed from his formal court attire into simpler riding clothes, though the quality of the fabric and the wolf emblem embroidered on his tunic still marked him unmistakably as king. You look beautiful, he said as he helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Evelyn smiled down at him, conscious of the stable hands pretending not to watch their monarch's display of affection. Flattery? Will get you everywhere, Your Majesty. They rode out through the castle gates with only 4 guards as escort, a compromise Evelyn had negotiated with Sir Roland, who had initially insisted on a full contingent. The summer countryside welcomed them with rolling fields of golden wheat and wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in purple and yellow. Aldrich led them along a familiar path that wound through a small forest before opening onto a secluded lake, a spot they had discovered during their early days as a married couple, when they had sought privacy away from the constant scrutiny of court life. Dismounting by the shore, they walked along the pebbly beach while their guards maintained a respectful distance. The afternoon sun dappled the water's surface with diamonds of light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wild roses. I miss this, Aldrich said after a comfortable silence. Missed you. Even 2 weeks away from Winthorpe seems too long now. The northern provinces needed their king, Evelyn reminded him, though she had missed him just as keenly. And from your reports, you accomplished much. We accomplished much, he corrected. Your suggestions for the flood relief were particularly well received. The village elders specifically asked me to convey their gratitude to their queen. Evelyn felt a surge of satisfaction. Her childhood spent near the coastal regions had given her practical knowledge of water management that proved valuable in helping the northern villages recover from spring flooding. They reached a fallen log that served as a natural bench overlooking the lake. Sitting close beside her, Aldrich took her hand in his thumb tracing idle patterns across her knuckles. There's something different about you, he observed, studying her face with the intensity that had unnerved her when they first met but now felt like the most natural thing in the world. You seem, I'm not sure, preoccupied perhaps? The moment Evelyn had both anticipated and dreaded had arrived sooner than expected. She turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. I do have something on my mind, something important. Aldrich's expression grew serious, his body tensing, slightly as it always did when he sensed significant news approaching. Tell me. She began, then paused, searching for the right words. We will need to make some adjustments to the royal nursery in the coming months. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then understanding dawned, his eyes widening as they dropped to her midsection before returning to her face. Evelyn, are you saying? Yes, she confirmed, unable to suppress her smile at his reaction. According to the royal physician, we should expect an heir to Winthorpe by winter's end. Aldrich sat perfectly still, his expression transforming from shock to wonder to an incandescent joy that took her breath away. Without warning, he pulled her into an embrace so fierce it nearly lifted her from the log. "A child," he whispered, against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." When he finally released her, Evelyn was startled to see moisture in his eyes. The fearsome Aldrich of Winthorpe, moved to tears by news of impending fatherhood. "Are you pleased then?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer abundantly clear. He laughed, the sound pure and unburdened in a way she had never heard before. "Pleased? Evelyn, I am—" He shook his head, words failing him momentarily. "In all my years, through victories and defeats, I never imagined such perfect happiness was possible." His hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, reverent and protective. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for several weeks, but the physician confirmed it only yesterday," she admitted. "I wanted to be certain before telling you." "And you feel well? No discomfort?" Concern now tempered his joy. "Some morning sickness, nothing more," she assured him. "The physician says I'm in excellent health, though he recommends I reduce my travel in the later months." Aldrich nodded solemnly, already shifting into protective mode. "We'll consult with the kingdom's best midwives, perhaps bring in specialists from the coastal regions. They're said to have advanced knowledge of childbirth practices." Evelyn placed her hand over his where it still rested on her abdomen. "Aldrich, women have been bearing children since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "Not just any woman," he countered, his voice low with intensity. "Not just any child. You carry the future of Winthorpe, yes, but more importantly, you carry our future, something I never dared hope for before you." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. For a man who had lived his life in service to crown and kingdom, who had known duty but rarely personal joy, this child represented a kind of immortality beyond that of historical legacy. "I was afraid," she confessed quietly. "Afraid that after all we've overcome, war, betrayal, conspiracy, something might still take this happiness from us." Aldrich's arm tightened around her shoulders. "A natural fear, but we've faced worse challenges and emerged stronger. This child will be born into peace, protected by parents who have already proven they can overcome any threat." They remained by the lake until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, discussing names, making plans, sharing their hopes and fears for the child that would forever change their lives. When they finally mounted their horses for the return journey, Aldrich insisted she ride at a gentle pace, already treating her with the extra care her condition warranted. News of the Queen's pregnancy spread through Winthorpe Castle by evening, despite the couple's intention to make a formal announcement the following day. Lady Matilda, unsurprisingly, had ensured that key members of the household were informed, and their knowing smiles greeted the royal couple at dinner. That night, lying beside Aldrich in their bedchamber, Evelyn felt a profound sense of peace. His hand rested protectively over her stomach as he slept, his normally vigilant features relaxed in slumber. The journey that had begun in a cold prison cell had led to this moment of perfect contentment. A queen, beloved by her king and people, carrying the next generation of Winthorpe's legacy. Outside their window, a full moon cast silver light across the kingdom that would one day belong to their child. In that moment, the future seemed not frightening, but full of limitless promise. Winter descended upon Winthorpe with unusual gentleness that year, as if nature itself conspired to ease the Queen's final months of pregnancy. Snow fell in light dustings rather than heavy drifts, and the bitter winds that typically howled around the castle towers remained mild and intermittent. Within the royal bedchamber, a fire blazed continuously, keeping the space warm despite the season's chill. Evelyn stood by the window, one hand resting on her heavily swollen abdomen, watching as snowflakes danced in the early morning light. 7 months had passed since she had shared the news of her pregnancy with Aldrich by the lake. 7 months of joyful anticipation mingled with the ordinary business of ruling a kingdom. Now, with barely 2 weeks remaining before the physician's predicted delivery date, she found herself increasingly reflective. A movement behind her preceded Aldrich's arms encircling her, his hands coming to rest protectively over hers on their unborn child. "You should be resting," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've rested enough to last a lifetime," she replied, leaning back against his solid presence. "The midwife says movement is good for encouraging the baby to assume the proper position." "The midwife isn't here to see you standing barefoot on cold stone," he countered, though his tone remained gentle. "Come back to bed, at least until the servants bring breakfast." Eveline allowed him to guide her back to the massive four-poster bed they shared, settling against the plush pillows with a contented sigh. Pregnancy had not been easy. There had been days of exhaustion and discomfort, but Aldrich's attentiveness had made it bearable. The fearsome warrior king had revealed an unexpectedly tender side, personally overseeing every detail of her care and the preparations for their child. "The council meeting is at midday," she reminded him as he tucked a fur-lined blanket around her legs. "Lord Gareth will expect your decision on the eastern trade routes." Aldrich sat beside her on the edge of the bed, his weight creating a comfortable dip in the mattress. "The council can function without me for one day. I've decided to remain with you." Eveline raised an eyebrow. "Because you think today is the day?" "Because I think any day could be the day," he corrected, his hand finding hers atop the blanket. "And I have no intention of being in a tedious meeting discussing taxation of silk imports when my son or daughter decides to make their entrance into the world." The conviction in his voice brought a smile to Eveline's lips. "The kingdom managed without your constant oversight for the first 40 years of your life. I suspect it can survive a few more days." "The kingdom, yes. I'm less certain about myself." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a gesture that had become habitual during her pregnancy. "I find I can hardly focus on matters of state when my mind constantly returns to you and the child." "The great Aldrich of Winthorpe, distracted from duty by mere domestic concerns?" she teased. "Your enemies would scarcely believe it." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn features. "Let them doubt. It will make their eventual defeat all the more surprising." A knock at the door announced the arrival of breakfast. A hearty meal of warm bread, honey, winter berries, and herbal tea specially blended to strengthen the queen for the delivery ahead. As they ate together in comfortable silence, Eveline contemplated how profoundly their lives had changed in the span of a single year. "Do you ever think about how we began?" she asked suddenly. "How different everything might have been had you not decided to investigate Osric's accusations yourself?" Aldrich considered her question, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I've wondered that many times. What if I had accepted his word without question? What if I had not seen you in that cell, had not recognized the truth in your eyes?" He shook his head, slowly. "The thought haunts me still." "Yet you did see me," Eveline reminded him. "You did question. That's the man you are, Aldrich. One who seeks truth even when lies would be more convenient." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Or perhaps something in me recognized something in you even then. Some connection that defied rational explanation. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, causing Eveline to wince and then laugh. "I think your child agrees with that rather romantic assessment." Aldrich's face lit up as it always did at evidence of their child's movements. He placed his palm against the spot where the kick had landed, rewarded almost immediately by another forceful nudge. "Strong," he observed proudly. "Like their mother." "And stubborn," Eveline added. "Like their father." Their shared laughter was interrupted by another knock, this one more urgent. Lady Matilda entered without waiting for permission, her normally composed features alight with excitement. "It's happened," she announced, practically vibrating with joy. "A messenger just arrived from Eldamar. The peace treaty has been formally ratified by their Council of Lords. The final threat to Winthorpe's security is resolved at last." Aldrich rose, his expression one of cautious optimism. "When did this occur?" 3 days ago. Their delegation will arrive within the week to exchange the formal documents." Matilda crossed the room to embrace Eveline gently. "Your child will be born into true peace, my dear. What better omen could we ask for?" The news brought tears to Eveline's eyes. Tears of relief and hope. The specter of Eldamar's hostility had been the one shadow on their happiness, the final, loose thread from the conflict that had brought them together. Now, with that threat neutralized, the future seemed unbounded in its promise. "I must inform the council," Aldrich said, already moving toward the door. "This changes our strategic position significantly." "And your decision to avoid today's meeting?" Evelyn reminded him with a knowing smile. He paused, torn between duty and his promise. "I'll return before midday," he compromised. "The announcement will take but an hour." After he had departed, Matilda settled into a chair beside the bed, her shrewd eyes assessing Evelyn carefully. "How are you truly feeling, my dear?" "No need to be brave for my benefit." "Tired," Evelyn admitted. "Anxious, impatient. The midwife says these are all normal feelings as the time approaches." "Entirely normal," Matilda agreed. "I remember when my sister, Aldrich's mother, was awaiting his birth. She alternated between tears and laughter hourly, convinced one moment that she was having a daughter, the next that twin sons were imminent." Evelyn smiled at this glimpse into Aldrich's origins. And what did she say when he finally arrived? That he was exactly who he was meant to be. Matilda replied softly, "As your child will be." The day passed quietly after that, with Aldrich returning as promised before midday. The news of Eldamar's ratification had spread throughout the castle, lifting everyone's spirits and creating an atmosphere of celebration that seemed fitting as they awaited the birth that would secure Winthorpe's future. As evening approached, Evelyn felt the first twinge, a tightening across her abdomen different from the practice contractions she had experienced in recent weeks. She said nothing at first, waiting to see if it would recur. When it did, some 20 minutes later, she caught Aldrich's eye across the room where he sat reviewing documents. "I think," she said calmly, "it might be wise to summon the midwife." His reaction was immediate, the parchment forgotten as he crossed to her side. "You're certain?" "Not entirely," she admitted, "but something feels different." He sent for the midwife and physician at once, his outward composure betrayed only by the tension in his shoulders and the way his hand sought hers, gripping perhaps more tightly than he realized. The labor progressed, slowly at first, the pains coming at irregular intervals throughout the evening. Evelyn walked the chamber as the midwife suggested, pausing to breathe through each contraction with Aldrich's steady support. As midnight approached, however, the rhythm intensified, the pains growing stronger and more frequent. "It's time to prepare the birthing chair," the midwife announced after examining Evelyn. "The child will come before dawn." What followed were hours that seemed both endless and fleeting, marked by pain more intense than Evelyn had imagined possible. Through it all, Aldrich remained at her side, defying tradition that would have banished him to pace the corridor with other anxious fathers. No one dared suggest the King of Winthorpe leave his queen in such a moment, not even the most conservative physician. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," Aldrich told her as she gripped his hands through a particularly fierce contraction. "Stronger than any warrior I've fought beside." "I don't feel strong," she gasped when the pain receded enough to speak. "I feel terrified." "The two are not mutually exclusive," he reminded her, brushing damp hair from her forehead with tender fingers. "True courage has always come from facing fear, not from its absence." His words gave her strength as the final stage of labor approached. When the midwife announced that it was time to push, Evelyn found reserves of determination she hadn't known she possessed. With Aldrich supporting her back, murmuring encouragement in her ear, she brought their child into the world as the first light of dawn crept through the chamber windows. "A son!" the midwife announced triumphantly, lifting the squalling infant for his parents to see. A healthy, perfect son for Winthorpe. Tears streamed freely down Evelyn's face as the baby was cleaned, swaddled, and placed in her arms. He was tiny yet complete, with a shock of dark hair like his father's and eyes that, when they briefly opened, revealed the same deep blue. His small fist curled around her finger with surprising strength, claiming her heart completely in that instant. "He's magnificent," Aldrich whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he sat beside them on the bed, one arm supporting Evelyn while the other hand gently touched their son's cheek. "You're magnificent." As the medical attendants discreetly withdrew, to give the new family privacy, Evelyn looked up at Aldrich, seeing in his face the same wonder and overwhelming love that filled her own heart. "What shall we name him?" she asked softly. Aldrich considered the tiny face, so new yet somehow familiar. "Edric," he suggested after a moment. "It means blessed ruler in the old tongue. For he is surely blessed, and will one day rule a kingdom, stronger and more peaceful than the one we inherited." "Edric," Evelyn repeated, testing the name against the reality of the child in her arms. "Prince Edric of Winthorpe. It suits him perfectly." Word of the prince's birth spread through the castle and beyond with remarkable speed. By midday, the castle courtyard was filled with citizens bearing gifts and well wishes for the royal family. Bells rang from every tower in celebration, and messengers rode out to carry the news to the farthest corners of the kingdom. That evening, recovered enough to sit up comfortably in bed, Evelyn watched as Aldrich held their son with the careful precision of a man accustomed to controlled strength. The fearsome warrior who had led armies into battle now cradled a newborn with infinite gentleness, his expression one of absolute awe. "I never thought to have this," he said quietly, his eyes not leaving the sleeping infant's face. "A child, a family. For so many years, the kingdom was everything. My purpose, my legacy, my future. And now?" Evelyn prompted when he fell silent. Aldrich looked up, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "Now I understand that kingdoms rise and fall, that crowns pass from head to head. But this," he glanced down at their son, "this is immortality of a different kind. This is love that transcends duty. Yet you will still be a king," she reminded him, "as he will be after you." "Yes," Aldrich agreed, "but I will be a better king for being his father, for understanding now what truly matters beyond power and politics." As twilight deepened outside their windows, Aldrich carefully returned the baby to Evelyn's arms before settling beside them on the bed. In the peaceful quiet of their chamber, the three of them formed a tableau of contentment that seemed miraculous, given all they had overcome to reach this moment. "From prisoner to queen to mother," Evelyn mused softly, "life takes unexpected paths. The best journeys often do," Aldrich replied, his arm encircling her shoulders, as they both gazed down at their sleeping son. "Especially when we find the right companion for the road." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing Winthorpe in pristine white that seemed to symbolize the fresh beginning this birth represented. Within the castle walls, a family that had seemed impossible a year earlier now existed in perfect harmony. A former prisoner who had become a beloved queen, a solitary king who had discovered the joys of family, and a newborn prince who embodied hope for a kingdom's peaceful future. As night fell completely, Evelyn leaned against Aldrich's shoulder, treasuring this moment of quiet triumph after all they had endured. The journey that had begun in a cold dungeon cell had led to this warm sanctuary of love and new life, proof that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest of destinies.